The Valkyries emerge from the shadowed depths of Germanic antiquity, their origins intertwined with the fundamental beliefs of warrior societies that flourished across northern Europe during the early centuries of the Common Era. These supernatural beings, who would later become central figures in Norse mythology, began their existence as something far more primal and immediate to the Germanic peoples who first conceived them. Archaeological evidence from Germanic burial sites dating to the 1st through 4th centuries AD reveals a complex relationship between warfare, death, and female spiritual entities. Excavations at Illerupedal in Denmark have uncovered massive weapon deposits, where entire armies' worth of military equipment was ritually destroyed and cast into sacred waters. These finds include not only spears, shields, and swords, but also personal ornaments and ceremonial items that suggest elaborate rituals surrounding the battlefield dead. The deliberate destruction of these weapons, often bent or broken before deposition, indicates beliefs about spiritual entities who claimed authority over the instruments of war and death. The Thorsbergmoor deposits in Schleswig-Holstein present even more compelling evidence of early Valkyrie-related beliefs. Here, archaeologists discovered not merely weapons, but complete warrior assemblages accompanied by female jewellery and ritual objects. The presence of fibulae decorated with bird motifs alongside military equipment suggests a connection between female supernatural beings and the battlefield that predates the fully developed Norse Valkyrie mythology by several centuries. These bird decorations are particularly significant as they align with later descriptions of Valkyries who could transform into ravens or swans to traverse the battlefield. Female warrior graves from the migration period provide additional insight into the cultural foundation from which Valkyrie beliefs emerged. The burial at Nordendorf in Bavaria, dating to approximately 500 AD, contained a woman interred with a complete set of weapons, including a spatha, seax, and shield boss. More intriguing still, this grave included amulets bearing runic inscriptions that invoke protective spirits associated with battle. Similar burials across Germanic territories from the Elbe to the Danube demonstrate that the concept of supernatural female warriors was not merely mythological but reflected actual cultural practices and beliefs about women's roles in warfare and death. The linguistic evolution of Valkyrie terminology reveals the deep antiquity of these concepts within Germanic culture. The Old Norse term Valkyria derives from two distinct elements: Val, meaning the slain, and Kyria, meaning chooser or selector. This compound construction appears in various forms across the Germanic language family, indicating its Proto-Germanic origins. The Old High German Wallachurga and the Anglo-Saxon Weilsjurge demonstrate that these concepts were not unique to Scandinavian culture, but represented a shared Germanic understanding of supernatural battlefield entities. The term valor itself carries profound significance within Germanic warrior culture. Unlike simple words for death or killing, valor specifically refers to those who die in battle, carrying connotations of honor and spiritual transformation. This linguistic distinction suggests that Germanic peoples recognized a fundamental difference between ordinary death and death in combat, with the latter requiring specialized spiritual intervention. The Valkyries, as choosers of the slain, thus occupied a crucial role in determining which warriors achieved this elevated status. Contemporary runic inscriptions provide additional evidence for early Valkyrie beliefs. The rockstone in Sweden, dating to the 9th century, contains references to battle spirits that align closely with later Valkyrie descriptions. More significantly, the stone's complex runic riddles suggest that beliefs about supernatural female warriors were sophisticated enough to serve as subjects for elaborate literary compositions well before the creation of the major Norse mythological texts. The archaeological record from Anglo-Saxon England offers parallel evidence for related beliefs. The Sutton Hoo ship burial, dating to the early 7th century, included a ceremonial whetstone topped with bronze figures that some scholars interpret as representations of battle spirits. The presence of this object alongside the burial's extensive military equipment suggests that Anglo-Saxon warrior culture incorporated beliefs about supernatural entities who influence battlefield outcomes, concepts that closely parallel continental Germanic Valkyrie traditions. Germanic warrior societies of the early medieval period operated within a complex spiritual framework that viewed warfare as fundamentally supernatural. Battle was not merely a physical contest between opposing forces, but a cosmic event involving divine intervention and spiritual transformation. Within this worldview, certain supernatural entities served as intermediaries between the mortal realm of combat and the divine sphere of fate and destiny. These beings, who would evolve into the Norse Valkyries, originally functioned as psychopomps, spiritual guides, who conducted the souls of fallen warriors to their appropriate afterlife destinations. The role of psychopomp was not unique to Germanic culture, but the specific characteristics of these battlefield spirits reflected distinctly Germanic values and concerns. Unlike the neutral guides found in other mythological traditions, Germanic battlefield psychopomps actively participated in determining who would die and who would live. This selective function aligned with Germanic concepts of weird or fate, which emphasized that destiny was not arbitrary, but followed patterns discernible to supernatural beings with appropriate wisdom and authority. Evidence from Lombard Italy provides additional insight into the geographical spread of these beliefs. The 7th century historian Paul the Deacon recorded traditions about supernatural female warriors among the Lombards, describing beings who appeared on battlefields to determine the outcome of conflicts. These accounts, while filtered through Christian interpretation, preserve elements that clearly relate to the broader Germanic tradition of battlefield spirits that would crystallize into the Norse Valkyrie concept. The transformation of these early battlefield spirits into the more familiar Norse Valkyries involved significant development and elaboration of their characteristics and functions. Early Germanic sources suggest that these entities were primarily concerned with death and its immediate aftermath. They selected which warriors would fall, guided their spirits to appropriate destinations, and perhaps influenced the distribution of weapons and treasure among the survivors. This relatively straightforward function would later expand to encompass roles as divine messengers, supernatural lovers, and active participants in the political affairs of gods and heroes. Frankish sources from the Merovingian period contain references to battle spirits that demonstrate the persistence of these beliefs as Germanic peoples encountered and adapted to changing political and religious circumstances. Gregory of Tours, writing in the late 6th century, described pagan Germanic practices involving the invocation of female war spirits before major battles. While Gregory's Christian perspective colours his accounts, the underlying practices he describes align closely with what we know about early Valkyrie-related rituals from other sources. The gradual evolution from early Germanic battlefield spirits to fully developed Norse Valkyries involved not only expansion of their roles and characteristics, but also their integration into increasingly complex mythological narratives. Early Germanic sources present these beings as relatively autonomous entities who operated according to their own supernatural logic. Later, Norse sources would subordinate them to the authority of Odin and integrate them into elaborate cosmic schemes involving the preparation for Ragnarok and the governance of divine politics. Archaeological evidence from Scandinavian sites dating to the 6th through 8th centuries reveals the intermediate stages of this development. Burial goods from this period include increasing numbers of objects decorated with female figures bearing weapons or associated with birds of prey. The famous helmet plates from Vendel and Valsgard depict armed women alongside warriors and mythological scenes, suggesting that beliefs about supernatural female warriors were becoming more elaborate and central to elite warrior culture during this crucial transitional period. The persistence of weapon deposits in Scandinavian bog sites throughout the early medieval period demonstrates the continued importance of rituals involving battlefield spirits. However, the character of these deposits changes over time, with later examples showing more standardized patterns of destruction and deposition. This standardization suggests that beliefs about the supernatural entities who received these offerings were becoming more codified and systematic, laying the groundwork for the elaborate Valkyrie mythology preserved in later Norse sources. The systematic integration of Valkyries into the Norse divine hierarchy represents one of the most sophisticated developments in Germanic mythological thinking. Unlike their earlier incarnations as autonomous battlefield spirits, the fully developed Norse Valkyries operated within a complex celestial bureaucracy that positioned them as direct servants of Odin in his role as Allfather. This transformation reflects not merely mythological elaboration, but fundamental changes in how Scandinavian societies understood the relationship between divine authority and mortal affairs. Odin's establishment of the Valkyries as his personal agents required a complete restructuring of their original functions. Where early Germanic battlefield spirits had operated according to their own supernatural logic, Norse Valkyries became instruments of divine policy. The Prose Edda describes this relationship in terms that mirror earthly feudal arrangements, with the Valkyries serving as Odin's huskarls or household warriors. However, their service extended far beyond simple military loyalty to encompass roles as intelligence gatherers, diplomatic messengers, and enforcers of divine will across the 9 realms. The hierarchical structure governing Valkyrie operations reveals careful attention to administrative detail that suggests these mythological constructs reflected actual Scandinavian governmental practices. Snorri Sturluson's account in Gylfaginning indicates that different Valkyries held varying ranks and responsibilities within Odin's service. Some, like Gondal and Skogul, served as field commanders responsible for overseeing multiple battles simultaneously. Others, such as Sigurdrifa and Brunhild, functioned as special agents assigned to influence specific heroes or political situations. This stratification allowed Odin to maintain direct control over military and political developments across vast geographical areas, while delegating operational authority to trusted subordinates. The physical infrastructure supporting Valkyrie operations centered on Valhalla, but extended throughout Asgard and into the mortal realm through an elaborate network of sacred sites and supernatural pathways. Archaeological evidence from late Iron Age Scandinavia reveals numerous locations that appear to have served as earthly focal points for Valkyrie activities. The Great Hall excavated at Uppsala in southern Sweden, dating to the 6th through 10th centuries, contained ritual deposits including weapons, jewellery and animal bones, arranged in patterns that suggest ceremonies invoking Valkyrie intervention. Similar sites at Tysso in Denmark and Helgö in Sweden demonstrate that belief in Valkyrie presence required substantial material investment in appropriate ceremonial infrastructure. The Valkyries' fundamental duty as choosers of the slain operated according to complex criteria that balanced divine policy objectives with cosmic necessity. Their selection process involved far more than simple identification of brave warriors. The Völuspá and other Eddic sources indicate that Valkyries evaluated potential candidates based on their roles in predetermined fate patterns, their value to Odin's strategic objectives, and their compatibility with the social dynamics of Valhalla's warrior community. This multifaceted assessment required extensive knowledge of mortal affairs, supernatural insight into character and destiny, and sophisticated understanding of divine politics. The actual mechanics of battlefield selection involved coordinated operations between multiple Valkyries working in carefully orchestrated teams. The Daradal Jod, preserved in Njal Saga, provides detailed descriptions of 12 Valkyries weaving the fate of warriors at the Battle of Clontarf in 1014. Their weaving metaphor reveals the collaborative nature of their work, with individual Valkyries contributing specific elements to overall battle outcomes while maintaining coordination with their colleagues' efforts. The loom they operate uses human entrails as warp threads and severed heads as weights, emphasizing the visceral reality of their decision-making process. Contemporary runic inscriptions from battlefield sites across Scandinavia provide additional evidence for how Valkyrie selection operated in practice. The Rockstone's complex verses reference battle spirits who choose from among the weapon bearers, using terminology that distinguishes between different categories of warriors based on their spiritual worthiness rather than simple martial prowess. Similar inscriptions from Denmark and Norway employ formulaic language invoking Valkyrie intervention, suggesting that warriors and their commanders actively sought to influence the selection process through appropriate ritual observances. The relationship between Valkyrie activities and predetermined fate represents one of the most philosophically sophisticated aspects of Norse cosmology. The concept of weird or orlog in Germanic tradition posited that cosmic events followed predetermined patterns established by the Norns at the moment of creation. However, this determinism did not eliminate the need for active agents to implement fate's requirements. The Valkyries served as executive instruments of destiny, ensuring that predetermined outcomes manifested through appropriate sequences of cause and effect. This role required Valkyries to possess comprehensive knowledge of fate patterns extending across multiple generations and involving complex interactions between divine, heroic, and ordinary human actors. The Volsunga saga demonstrates this knowledge through Brunhild's prophecies regarding Sigurd's descendants and their roles in future conflicts. Her predictions prove accurate across multiple generations, indicating access to information that transcends normal temporal limitations. Similar prophetic abilities appear in other Valkyrie narratives, suggesting that their service to fate required supernatural cognitive capabilities that allowed them to perceive and manipulate causal relationships across extended time periods. The practical implementation of fate through Valkyrie intervention involved careful coordination with other supernatural entities responsible for different aspects of cosmic governance. The Norns established broad destiny patterns, but Valkyries determined specific methods for achieving predetermined outcomes. This division of labour required constant communication between different levels of the divine hierarchy, with Valkyries serving as intermediaries between fate's abstract requirements and the concrete realities of mortal existence. Archaeological evidence from Scandinavian ritual sites reveals material traces of ceremonies designed to facilitate communication between Valkyries and other supernatural entities. The complex of buildings excavated at Old Uppsala included structures specifically designed for rituals involving multiple categories of divine beings. Deposits found within these buildings contain objects associated with fate working, including weaving implements, runic inscriptions, and sacrificial materials arranged in patterns that suggest elaborate ceremonies coordinating different aspects of supernatural governance. The Valkyries' dual nature as agents of divine justice and harbingers of battlefield doom created inherent tensions that required careful management within Norse mythological frameworks. Their role as servants of cosmic order demanded that they implement justice according to divine standards that often conflicted with human concepts of fairness or mercy. Simultaneously, their function as death-bringers required them to cause suffering and loss among mortals who might be personally sympathetic or politically valuable. This duality manifests most clearly in narratives involving Valkyries' relationships with specific heroes. The Volsunga saga presents Brunhild's conflict between her duty to Odin and her personal attachment to Sigurd as a fundamental tension between different aspects of her nature. Her initial assignment to punish Sigurd for disobedience conflicts with her recognition of his heroic qualities and her developing emotional attachment. The resolution of this conflict through her manipulation of events leading to Sigurd's death demonstrates how Valkyries managed competing loyalties by finding solutions that satisfied both personal and professional obligations. The psychological complexity required for Valkyries to function effectively in these dual roles suggests sophisticated understanding of moral ambiguity within Norse culture. Unlike simple agents of divine wrath or mechanical instruments of fate, Valkyries possessed emotional depth and moral agency that allowed them to experience genuine conflict between competing obligations. This psychological realism enhanced their effectiveness as mythological figures by making their actions comprehensible to audiences familiar with similar conflicts in their own political and social circumstances. The administrative systems governing Valkyrie operations required extensive documentation and communication networks that extended throughout the 9 realms. References in various Edic sources indicate that Valkyries maintained detailed records of warrior genealogies, battle outcomes, and fate patterns that informed their selection decisions. The preservation and analysis of this information required sophisticated organisational capabilities that mirror the administrative systems of medieval Scandinavian kingdoms. The Grimnismal provides insights into the information management system supporting Valkyrie operations through its detailed descriptions of Valhalla's physical layout and operational procedures. The hall's 540 doors, each wide enough for 800 warriors to pass through simultaneously, suggest infrastructure designed to accommodate massive throughput of personnel and information. The presence of specific Valkyries assigned to different aspects of hall management indicates specialized administrative roles that required extensive coordination and communication capabilities. The transformation from battlefield selectors to hall administrators represented perhaps the most complex aspect of Valkyrie duties within the Norse cosmic order. Once the chosen slain crossed the Rainbow Bridge Bifrost and entered through Valhalla's massive gates, the Valkyries' responsibilities shifted from selection to cultivation, requiring an entirely different set of skills and organisational capabilities. The Great Hall of the Slain demanded constant maintenance, not merely of its physical structure but of the intricate social and military systems that would prepare the Einherjar for their ultimate purpose at Ragnarok. Valhalla's daily operations required a sophisticated division of labour among the Valkyries that reflected both their individual capabilities and the complex needs of housing and training hundreds of thousands of dead warriors. The hall itself, described in the Grimnismal as having 540 doors with room for 800 warriors to march through each simultaneously, demanded logistical coordination on an unprecedented scale. Archaeological parallels from great halls excavated at sites like Ledra and Gamla Uppsala provide insight into the practical challenges of managing such enormous spaces, though even the largest earthly halls pale in comparison to Valhalla's supernatural dimensions. The serving of mead within Valhalla represented far more than simple hospitality, functioning instead as a complex ritual system that maintained the Einherjar's supernatural vitality while reinforcing their bonds to Odin and their fellow warriors. The mead itself flowed from the udders of the goat Heidrun, who fed upon the leaves of Larada, the great tree that stood atop Valhalla's roof. This supernatural beverage required careful distribution according to protocols that recognized both the hierarchical status of different warriors and the specific needs of their ongoing preparation for cosmic battle. The Valkyries responsible for mead service operated according to carefully established rotations that ensured each warrior received appropriate attention while maintaining the ceremonial dignity required for such sacred duties. Thruda, whose name means strength, supervised the serving of warriors who had died in single combat, while Hlok, Battle Din, attended to those who had fallen in large-scale conflicts. This specialization allowed each Valkyrie to develop expertise in managing the particular psychological and spiritual needs of warriors from different combat backgrounds, ensuring that the transition from mortal death to supernatural afterlife proceeded smoothly. The physical act of serving required Valkyries to maintain constant awareness of each warrior's individual history, achievements, and emotional state. Warriors who arrived bearing fresh battle wounds needed different treatment from those who had been in Valhalla for centuries. Recent arrivals often struggled with the reality of their death and required careful guidance to accept their new existence, while veteran Einherjar sometimes grew restless during periods of extended preparation and needed encouragement to maintain their readiness. The Valkyries' ability to provide appropriate counsel and support demanded intimate knowledge of each warrior's background and personality. The preparation of the Einherjar for Ragnarok involved daily training exercises that far exceeded the scope of any mortal military preparation. Each morning, the warriors armed themselves and engaged in combat that resulted in genuine wounds and apparent deaths, only to be restored to full health for the evening feast. This cycle of destruction and renewal required constant Valkyrie supervision to ensure that the training achieved its intended purposes without allowing destructive rivalries or permanent injuries to develop among the participants. Valkyries assigned to training supervision possessed extensive knowledge of combat techniques from across the 9 realms and throughout different historical periods. Warriors who had died using bronze weapons needed instruction in iron and steel techniques, while those from earlier eras required familiarization with evolving tactical systems. Gondal specialized in teaching spear formations that would prove effective against the giants' unconventional fighting methods, while Skogul focused on sword techniques adapted for combat in Ragnarok's predicted, chaotic conditions. The psychological preparation of the Einherjar presented challenges that required Valkyries to function as counselors and motivators, as well as military instructors. Many warriors arrived in Valhalla carrying emotional burdens from their mortal lives, unfinished business, concern for families left behind, or regret over circumstances surrounding their deaths. The Valkyries needed to help these warriors process their past experiences while redirecting their focus toward their cosmic responsibilities. This counseling work demanded sophisticated understanding of human psychology and extensive training in techniques for managing grief, anger, and other disruptive emotions. Sigrun, whose expertise lay in working with warriors who had died young, developed specialized methods for helping these Einherjar channel their frustrated ambitions into productive preparation for Ragnarok. Her techniques involved structured discussions about the greater purpose served by their sacrifice, combined with training exercises that demonstrated how their youthful energy could contribute to the final battle's success. Warriors who had died in their prime often possessed exceptional physical capabilities but lacked the emotional maturity needed for extended military preparation, requiring patient guidance to develop appropriate discipline and focus. The hierarchical structure governing Valkyrie operations within Valhalla reflected both their individual areas of expertise and their relative standing within Odin's divine administration. Senior Valkyries like Ragnarok held authority over multiple aspects of hall management, coordinating between different functional areas and ensuring that all activities supported the overarching goal of Einherjar preparation. These senior positions required not only proven competence in specific duties, but also demonstrated ability to manage complex interpersonal relationships among both Valkyries and warriors. Mid-level Valkyries typically specialized in particular aspects of hall operations, developing deep expertise in areas such as weapons maintenance, tactical instruction, or warrior counseling. Herfjotr supervised the care and repair of supernatural weapons that required specialized knowledge to maintain their magical properties. Her workshops, located in Valhalla's lower levels, contained forges that burned with flames fed by the breath of dragons, producing heat intense enough to work metals that existed nowhere in the mortal realm. The weapons produced in these forges would prove essential during Ragnarok, when conventional arms would prove inadequate against the supernatural enemies facing the Einherjar. Junior Valkyries often began their service in Valhalla, performing basic maintenance duties that allowed them to observe and learn from their more experienced colleagues. These positions included responsibilities such as maintaining the hall's physical structure, managing supplies of food and drink, and providing basic assistance to newly arrived Einherjar. The rotation through different junior positions ensured that all Valkyries developed comprehensive understanding of hall operations before advancing to more specialised roles. The interaction between Valkyries and Odin's other supernatural servants created a complex web of relationships that required careful management to maintain efficient operations. Hugin and Munin, Odin's ravens, served as intelligence gatherers who brought news from across the 9 realms each day. The Valkyries needed to coordinate with these messengers to ensure that information about potential conflicts or emerging threats informed their training programs and selection priorities. When the ravens reported unusual giant activity near Jotunheim's borders, the Valkyries would adjust their tactical instruction to emphasize techniques effective against giant opponents. Jerry and Freki, Odin's wolves, participated in the daily training exercises as opponents for the Einherjar, providing combat experience against supernatural predators that would prepare the warriors for encounters with Fenrir and other monstrous enemies during Ragnarok. The Valkyries responsible for training coordination worked closely with these wolves to design exercises that challenged the warriors appropriately without causing unnecessary casualties that would disrupt the training schedule. The wolves' supernatural strength and ferocity provided realistic preparation for the cosmic battle's anticipated intensity. The Valkyries' relationship with Odin himself involved regular consultation sessions where they reported on the Einherjar's progress and received guidance about strategic priorities for their ongoing preparation. These meetings took place in Odin's private chambers within Valhalla, spaces decorated with trophies from his travels across the 9 realms and furnished with seats carved from the bones of primordial giants. During these sessions, Odin would share intelligence gathered through his various supernatural networks and provide specific instructions about areas requiring enhanced focus in the training programs. The complexity of managing relationships between Einherjar from different cultural backgrounds and historical periods required Valkyries to possess extensive knowledge of diverse warrior traditions and social customs. Vikings who had died in the 9th century needed to learn to fight alongside Saxon warriors from the 6th century, despite historical enmities that had shaped their mortal lives. The Valkyries developed elaborate protocols for introducing warriors from conflicting backgrounds, using structured activities that emphasized their shared commitment to cosmic defense while gradually building mutual respect and cooperation. Randgrids specialized in managing integration between warriors from different linguistic backgrounds, developing communication systems that allowed effective coordination despite language barriers. Her methods involved intensive training in a simplified command language that incorporated elements from multiple Germanic dialects, combined with standardized gesture systems that could convey complex tactical instructions without spoken words. These communication protocols proved essential for coordinating the massive formations that would be required during Ragnarok's climactic battles. The maintenance of Valhalla's physical structure required constant attention from Valkyries, with specialized knowledge of supernatural architecture and materials. The hall's walls, constructed from spear shafts and roofed with shields, demanded regular inspection and repair to maintain their structural integrity under the stress of daily combat training. Skuld supervised teams of Valkyries who possessed the technical expertise needed to work with these unusual building materials, ensuring that the hall remained capable of housing its enormous population, while providing appropriate spaces for all necessary activities. The supernatural properties of Valhalla's construction materials created unique maintenance challenges that had no parallel in mortal architecture. The spear shafts that form the walls retain their original magical properties, requiring specialized techniques to prevent them from activating inappropriately during routine maintenance. Similarly, the shield roof needed regular adjustment to maintain proper protection against supernatural weather phenomena that could disrupt the hall's internal environment. These maintenance activities required Valkyries to possess both technical construction skills and extensive knowledge of magical item management. The transition from collective mythological figures to individually characterize supernatural beings represents one of the most significant developments in Norse Valkyrie tradition. While early Germanic sources present battlefield spirits as largely anonymous entities distinguished primarily by their shared functions, the mature Norse mythological corpus provides detailed portraits of specific Valkyries whose names, personalities, and individual legends illuminate different aspects of their cosmic roles. These named figures emerged from centuries of storytelling tradition that gradually accumulated distinctive characteristics and narrative associations around particular supernatural personalities. Brunhild stands as perhaps the most complex and fully developed individual Valkyrie in Norse literature, her legend preserved across multiple sources that reveal the evolution of her character through different storytelling traditions. The Volsunga saga presents her as a figure of tragic nobility, whose defiance of Odin's direct commands precipitates a cascade of consequences that ultimately destroys an entire heroic dynasty. Her original transgression involved showing mercy to a warrior whom Odin had marked for death, an act of compassion that violated the fundamental principle of absolute obedience required from Valkyrie servants. This disobedience resulted in her punishment through enchanted sleep, surrounded by a ring of fire that would burn any unworthy suitor who attempted to reach her. The ring of fire surrounding Brunhild's sleeping form represented more than simple protective magic, functioning instead as a test that would identify the one hero capable of awakening her while simultaneously serving as a prison that prevented her from resuming her duties as a Valkyrie. The flames possessed supernatural properties that could distinguish between different categories of approaching warriors, burning away cowardice and dishonour while allowing truly heroic individuals to pass unharmed. Archaeological evidence from ritual fire sites across Scandinavia suggests that similar protective flames featured in actual ceremonial practices, with circular arrangements of hearths found at locations like Apakra and Tiso, indicating real-world parallels to the mythological fire ring. Brunhild's awakening by Sigurd established her as the archetypal Valkyrie lover, a figure whose supernatural knowledge and warrior skills complemented and enhanced her chosen hero's capabilities. Her relationship with Sigurd transcended simple romantic attachment, involving the transmission of crucial wisdom about warfare, politics, and supernatural threats that would shape his subsequent adventures. The runic knowledge she shared with him included not only practical information about weapon enhancement and battle tactics, but also deeper understanding of fate patterns and divine politics that allowed him to navigate complex supernatural challenges. Her prophetic abilities manifested most clearly in her warnings about future conflicts and betrayals that would affect Sigurd's dynasty. These prophecies demonstrated her continued access to supernatural intelligence networks despite her separation from active Valkyrie service, suggesting that her punishment had not completely severed her connections to divine information sources. The accuracy of her predictions regarding Gunnar's treachery and the ultimate fate of the Volsung bloodline established her credibility as a source of supernatural wisdom while highlighting the tragic irony of possessing knowledge that could not prevent predetermined outcomes. The psychological complexity of Brunhild's character emerged through her struggle to reconcile competing loyalties between her love for Sigurd and her obligations to cosmic justice. Her manipulation of events leading to Sigurd's death represented not simple revenge, but a sophisticated attempt to resolve the fundamental contradiction between her personal desires and her supernatural duties. By engineering circumstances that resulted in Sigurd's heroic death in battle, she ensured his admission to Valhalla while simultaneously fulfilling the requirements of divine justice that demanded punishment for his earlier transgressions. Sigrun represents a different archetype within Valkyrie tradition, functioning as the active battlefield commander whose direct intervention in mortal conflicts shapes the outcomes of specific historical events. The Helgi lays present her as a figure who maintains ongoing involvement in earthly politics while fulfilling her supernatural duties, demonstrating how individual Valkyries could balance competing responsibilities without the tragic consequences that befell Brunhild. Her relationship with Helgi Hundingsbane involved active collaboration in military campaigns that required her to coordinate supernatural assistance with conventional tactical planning. Her battlefield appearances involved dramatic manifestations of Valkyrie power that influenced both the morale of opposing forces and the actual mechanics of combat. Witnesses described her arrival accompanied by supernatural phenomena, including sudden weather changes, the appearance of additional warriors who vanished after the battle, and weapons that struck with impossible force or accuracy. These manifestations required careful timing and coordination with natural atmospheric conditions to achieve maximum psychological impact while maintaining the appearance of divine intervention rather than obvious magical manipulation. The intelligence networks that supported Sigrun's military activities extended throughout Scandinavia and into the Germanic territories beyond, providing her with detailed information about enemy movements, political alliances, and strategic vulnerabilities that proved crucial for Helgi's success. Her ability to gather this intelligence involved coordination with other Valkyries, Odin's ravens, and various supernatural entities whose movements across different realms allowed comprehensive monitoring of potential threats. This information gathering required sophisticated analysis, capabilities that could distinguish between reliable reports and deliberate misinformation spread by enemy agents. Her prophetic warnings to Helgi regarding the circumstances of his eventual death demonstrated the complex relationship between Valkyrie knowledge and predetermined fate. While she possessed accurate information about the timing and manner of his death, her attempts to alter these outcomes through strategic advice and supernatural assistance proved ultimately ineffective against the fundamental patterns established by the Norns. This limitation highlighted the distinction between tactical intelligence that could influence specific battle outcomes and deeper fate patterns that remained beyond even Valkyrie authority to modify. Kara represents the Valkyrie tradition's connection to shape-shifting abilities and supernatural transformation. Her legend preserved primarily in the Kara saga, where she appears as both human woman and supernatural swan maiden. Her ability to assume avian form allowed her to conduct reconnaissance missions that would have been impossible for Earthbound agents, flying over enemy territories to observe troop movements and defensive preparations that informed her strategic recommendations. The transformation process itself required careful attention to timing and location, as the vulnerability during shape-changing left her temporarily defenseless against both physical and magical attacks. Her relationship with Helgi Hadding-Jaskati involved active participation in his military campaigns through aerial reconnaissance and battlefield intervention that demonstrated the practical applications of Valkyrie transformation abilities. During the siege of enemy strongholds, she would assume swan form to fly over defensive walls and identify weaknesses in fortifications or gaps in guard rotations that conventional scouts could not detect. These intelligence-gathering missions required extensive knowledge of military architecture and defensive tactics to identify tactically relevant information from aerial observations. The supernatural aspects of her avian transformation extended beyond simple physical shape-changing to encompass enhanced sensory capabilities that allowed her to detect magical threats and supernatural enemies that might otherwise remain hidden. Her enhanced vision could penetrate illusions and disguises that would deceive normal observers, while her supernatural hearing could detect conversations and planning sessions conducted in supposedly secure locations. These enhanced capabilities made her an invaluable asset for identifying supernatural threats that conventional military intelligence could not address. Her tragic death during one of these reconnaissance missions, caused by an enemy spear that struck her while in swan form, illustrated the genuine risks faced by Valkyries who engaged in active military operations. The circumstances of her death, occurring while she was providing crucial intelligence that enabled Helgi's victory, established her as a martyr figure whose sacrifice exemplified the dedication required from Valkyries who chose to involve themselves directly in mortal conflicts. Her death also demonstrated that Valkyries' supernatural abilities did not provide complete protection against determined enemies who possessed appropriate weapons and tactics. Skuld occupies a unique position within Valkyrie tradition as both individual supernatural being and personification of cosmic principles, her name meaning debt or obligation, connecting her directly to concepts of fate and predetermined destiny. Her dual nature as Valkyrie and Norn allowed her to function as an intermediary between the battlefield selection duties performed by other Valkyries and the deeper fate-weaving activities conducted by the three sisters at the base of Yggdrasil. This connection provided her with access to information about long-term destiny patterns that extended far beyond the immediate concerns of individual battles or heroes. Her responsibilities included ensuring that Valkyrie battlefield selections aligned with broader cosmic requirements established by the Norn's fate-weaving activities. When other Valkyries identified worthy warriors for selection, Skuld would verify that their deaths and subsequent service in Valhalla contributed appropriately to the overall patterns needed for Ragnarok's successful prosecution. This verification process required comprehensive understanding of how individual warrior capabilities would combine with those of other Einherjar to create effective fighting units capable of confronting specific categories of supernatural enemies. Her prophetic abilities surpassed those of other named Valkyries in both scope and accuracy, encompassing not only immediate battle outcomes, but also long-term consequences that would manifest across multiple generations. Her warnings about the ultimate fate of various heroic dynasties prove consistently accurate. Though like other prophetic figures in Norse tradition, her knowledge of future events did not extend to methods for preventing predetermined outcomes. This limitation created ongoing tension between her desire to assist worthy heroes and her obligation to maintain cosmic balance by allowing fate patterns to unfold according to established requirements. The battle-focused Valkyries mentioned throughout the prose and poetic Eddas demonstrate the specialized roles that different supernatural beings fulfilled within Odin's military organization. Gondal, whose name means wand wielder or magic user, specialized in battlefield magic that could influence combat outcomes through supernatural intervention rather than direct physical participation. Her techniques included weather manipulation that could create fog to conceal friendly troop movements, wind control that affected arrow flight and spear accuracy, and ground conditions that favoured particular tactical formations over others. Her magical interventions required careful coordination with conventional military tactics to achieve maximum effectiveness without creating obvious supernatural manifestations that might undermine warrior morale or violate cosmic restrictions on divine intervention in mortal affairs. The timing of weather changes needed to appear natural while providing tactical advantages at crucial moments, requiring extensive knowledge of atmospheric conditions and meteorological patterns. Her ability to predict and manipulate these conditions made her an invaluable asset for commanders who could coordinate their tactical planning with her supernatural capabilities. Skogul, meaning high towering or shaker, functioned as a psychological warfare specialist whose battlefield presence could influence enemy morale and fighting effectiveness through carefully orchestrated supernatural manifestations. Her techniques involved creating auditory and visual phenomena that suggested divine displeasure with opposing forces while encouraging friendly warriors through signs of supernatural support. These manifestations required sophisticated understanding of warrior psychology and extensive knowledge of cultural symbols and religious beliefs that could be manipulated to achieve desired psychological effects. Her appearances on battlefields involved dramatic demonstrations of supernatural power that could break enemy formations through fear while inspiring friendly forces to greater efforts. The specific nature of these manifestations varied according to the cultural backgrounds and religious beliefs of the opposing forces, with different supernatural phenomena proving effective against different enemy types. Her ability to adapt her techniques to specific tactical situations made her particularly valuable for conflicts involving culturally diverse opponents who required different approaches to achieve optimal psychological impact. Hilda, whose name means battle, represented the archetypal warrior Valkyrie, whose primary focus involved direct combat participation rather than the administrative or magical specializations developed by other named figures. Her fighting style emphasized aggressive offensive tactics that could break through enemy defensive formations while providing inspiring examples of supernatural warrior prowess for mortal allies to emulate. Her weapons included not only conventional arms enhanced with supernatural properties, but also unique items crafted specifically for Valkyrie combat requirements that possess capabilities unavailable to mortal warriors. Her battlefield tactics involved coordinated attacks with other combat-focused Valkyries that could create gaps in enemy lines through concentrated supernatural assault, followed by immediate exploitation of these openings by mortal allied forces. These coordinated attacks required precise timing and extensive tactical planning to achieve maximum effectiveness, while minimizing the risk of supernatural casualties that would reduce overall Valkyrie combat capability. Her experience in managing these complex tactical situations made her a crucial figure in training programs designed to prepare the Einherjar for similar coordination requirements during Ragnarok. Regional variations in Valkyrie names and characteristics across different Germanic territories reflect the diverse cultural influences that shaped local interpretations of these supernatural figures. Anglo-Saxon sources preserve names like Welsirgi and Sigurfolk that emphasize different aspects of battlefield intervention than their Scandinavian counterparts, with greater focus on victory-bringing and peacemaking functions that aligned with Anglo-Saxon political concerns about territorial consolidation and defensive warfare. These variations suggest that local warrior cultures adapted the basic Valkyrie concept to address their specific military and political requirements. Continental Germanic sources from Frankish and Lombard territories present Valkyrie-like figures, with names emphasizing protective and guardian functions that reflect the different strategic challenges faced by Germanic peoples who'd settled in former Roman territories. These figures often possessed characteristics that combined traditional Valkyrie battlefield roles with administrative and protective duties that supported the governance of established kingdoms, rather than the raiding and conquest activities that dominated Scandinavian warrior culture. The adaptation of Valkyrie concepts to these different political contexts demonstrates the flexibility of Germanic supernatural traditions in responding to changing historical circumstances. The symbolic meanings embedded in Valkyrie names reveal sophisticated understanding of the relationship between language, supernatural power, and cosmic function within Germanic mythological thinking. Names incorporating elements related to battle, death, and divine authority serve not merely as identifying labels, but as expressions of the specific roles and capabilities that individual Valkyries possessed within the broader supernatural hierarchy. The linguistic analysis of these names provides insight into the cultural values and religious concepts that shaped Germanic warrior societies' understanding of supernatural intervention in human affairs. The intersection between divine duty and mortal emotion created some of the most compelling and tragic narratives within Norse mythology, as Valkyries who descended from their celestial roles to engage with human heroes inevitably faced consequences that stripped them of their immortal status and supernatural authority. These stories reveal fundamental tensions within the Norse cosmic order, where supernatural beings possessed enough autonomy to make choices that violated their prescribed functions, yet remained subject to divine justice that punished such transgressions with devastating thoroughness. The Volsung saga presents the most detailed examination of these themes through Brunhild's complex relationship with divine authority and mortal love. Her initial transgression occurred during a battle between two kings, Hjálmgunnar and Agnar, where Odin had predetermined that Hjálmgunnar should fall. Brunhild's decision to grant victory to Hjálmgunnar instead represented more than simple battlefield error. It constituted direct defiance of Odin's explicit commands regarding fate's implementation. The circumstances surrounding this disobedience reveal the psychological pressures that could drive even disciplined Valkyries to prioritize personal judgment over divine directive. Hjálmgunnar's worthiness as a warrior had impressed Brunhild during her preliminary reconnaissance of the opposing forces. His tactical innovations, personal courage, and treatment of defeated enemies demonstrated qualities that aligned with traditional heroic ideals, making him appear more deserving of victory than his opponent. However, Odin's selection of Agnar reflected strategic considerations that transcended individual merit, involving complex political calculations about future power balances and the preparation of specific bloodlines for roles in approaching cosmic conflicts. Brunhild's inability to perceive these broader implications led her to substitute personal evaluation for divine wisdom. The punishment that followed demonstrated Odin's absolute intolerance for subordinate initiative that conflicted with predetermined plans. Rather than simple dismissal from Valkyrie service, Brunhild faced a carefully constructed penalty that would strip away her supernatural abilities while forcing her to experience the full vulnerability of mortal existence. The enchanted sleep imposed upon her involved more than temporary unconsciousness. It represented a fundamental alteration of her supernatural nature that would prevent her from accessing the divine knowledge and power that had defined her identity as a Valkyrie. The ring of fire surrounding her sleeping form served multiple functions within the punishment structure. Its flames would burn away anyone whose courage and nobility fell short of heroic standards, ensuring that only a truly worthy warrior could awaken her. This requirement aligned the punishment with cosmic necessity by guaranteeing that Brunhild's eventual awakening would occur through contact with a hero whose capabilities matched her own supernatural knowledge. The fire's supernatural properties could distinguish between different categories of approaching warriors, responding to internal character qualities rather than external appearances or proclaimed intentions. Archaeological evidence from Scandinavian ritual sites provides context for understanding the fire ring's symbolic significance within Germanic warrior culture. Excavations at Borg in the Lofoten Islands revealed circular arrangements of hearths surrounding central ceremonial spaces, with evidence suggesting that these fires burned continuously during important religious observances. Similar circular fire arrangements at Pakra and Tiso demonstrate that protective flames held deep cultural significance as barriers that separated sacred spaces from ordinary surroundings, while testing the worthiness of those seeking access. Sigurd's successful passage through the fire ring represented more than simple heroic achievement. It established a supernatural bond between the awakener and the awakened that would shape both their destinies according to patterns that neither could fully comprehend. The moment of awakening initiated a complex exchange of knowledge and power that transformed Sigurd from a promising young warrior into a hero capable of confronting supernatural threats and political challenges that would have overwhelmed lesser individuals. Brunhild's transmission of runic wisdom, battle tactics, and prophetic warnings provided him with capabilities that transcended normal human limitations. The runic knowledge she shared encompassed both practical applications for weapon enhancement and deeper understanding of cosmic principles that governed supernatural conflicts. Her instruction in victory runes taught him to carve specific symbols on sword blades and spear points that would ensure accuracy and penetrating power against supernatural opponents. The El runes she revealed provided protection against poisoning and magical influence, while the speech runes enhanced his ability to negotiate complex political situations and detect deception in diplomatic encounters. These teachings represented centuries of accumulated Valkyrie expertise, distilled into forms that mortal intelligence could comprehend and apply. Her prophetic warnings about future betrayals and conflicts demonstrated her retained access to supernatural intelligence networks despite her separation from active Valkyrie service. The accuracy of her predictions regarding Gunnar's eventual treachery The manipulation surrounding Sigurd's marriage to Gudrun and the ultimate destruction of the Volsung bloodline established her credibility as a source of divine wisdom while highlighting the tragic limitations of prophetic knowledge. Her ability to foresee these events did not extend to methods for preventing them, creating ongoing tension between her desire to protect Sigurd and her understanding of fate's inexorable requirements. The psychological complexity of Brunhild's situation emerged through her struggle to reconcile competing loyalties between personal love and cosmic justice. Her continued awareness of divine politics and supernatural threats made her uniquely qualified to guide Sigurd's heroic career, yet her punishment had specifically intended to remove her from such influential roles. Her solution involved subtle manipulation of circumstances that would fulfill both her protective instincts towards Sigurd and the cosmic requirements that demanded his eventual participation in predetermined fate patterns. The tragic resolution of their relationship through Sigurd's death represented Brunhild's ultimate sacrifice of personal happiness to ensure cosmic balance. Her manipulation of Gunnar's jealousy and the subsequent events leading to Sigurd's murder served multiple purposes within the broader mythological framework. Sigurd's death in battle guaranteed his admission to Valhalla, where his supernatural capabilities would contribute to the Einherjar's preparation for Ragnarok. Simultaneously, his death resolved the contradiction between Brunhild's mortal attachment and her residual obligations to divine justice. The Helgi lays present a different model of Valkyrie mortal relationships through Sigrun's story, which demonstrates how supernatural beings could maintain ongoing involvement with human heroes while avoiding the tragic consequences that befell Brunhild. Sigrun's relationship with Helgi Hundingsbane involved active collaboration in military campaigns that required her to balance supernatural assistance with respect for cosmic limitations on divine intervention in mortal affairs. Her approach emphasized indirect support that enhanced Helgi's natural capabilities rather than replacing them with supernatural power. Her battlefield interventions involved carefully orchestrated manifestations that influence combat outcomes through psychological impact and tactical advantage, rather than direct magical assault. During the battle at Frekastein, her appearance accompanied by supernatural phenomena, including sudden fog banks and the sound of approaching reinforcements, created confusion among enemy forces while inspiring Helgi's warriors to greater efforts. These interventions required precise timing and extensive knowledge of atmospheric conditions to maintain the appearance of natural weather changes rather than obvious magical manipulation. The intelligence networks that supported Sigrun's assistance to Helgi extended throughout Scandinavia and into neighbouring territories, providing detailed information about enemy movements and political developments that proved crucial for strategic planning. Her ability to gather this intelligence involved coordination with other Valkyries and supernatural entities whose movements across different realms allowed comprehensive monitoring of potential threats. The analysis of this information required sophisticated understanding of political relationships and military capabilities that could identify emerging dangers before they developed into immediate threats. Her prophetic abilities manifested through warnings about specific tactical situations and enemy strategies, rather than the broad fate patterns that characterized Brunhild's predictions. During the siege of enemy strongholds, she would provide advance notice of sally attempts and defensive weaknesses that allowed Helgi to position his forces for maximum advantage. These tactical prophecies proved consistently accurate within their limited scope, though like other Valkyrie figures, her knowledge of deeper destiny patterns remained constrained by cosmic restrictions on supernatural intervention. The concept of reincarnation that governs the Helgi cycle presents unique insights into Norse understanding of supernatural relationships that transcend individual lifetimes. Sigrun's promise to reunite with Helgi in future incarnations established a pattern of recurring supernatural mortal partnerships that would continue across multiple generations. This cyclical relationship allowed for the exploration of how divine love could persist through different historical periods while adapting to changing circumstances and political contexts. The reincarnation process involved more than simple rebirth of individual souls. It encompassed the recreation of specific relationship dynamics and supernatural capabilities that had characterized previous incarnations. Sigrun's recognition of Helgi's reborn essence in subsequent heroes demonstrated her retained access to spiritual knowledge that could identify souls across different physical forms. This recognition ability required sophisticated understanding of essential character qualities that persisted through reincarnation cycles, while distinguishing them from superficial similarities that might mislead supernatural observers. The political implications of these recurring partnerships extended beyond personal relationships to encompass broader patterns of supernatural intervention in historical events. Each incarnation of the Helgi-Sigrun partnership occurred during periods of significant political upheaval that required heroic intervention to maintain cosmic balance. Their collaboration in different historical contexts demonstrated how supernatural mortal alliances could adapt to changing strategic requirements while maintaining consistent underlying principles about the proper relationship between divine assistance and human agency. Other tales of Valkyrie mortal relationships throughout Norse literature reveal the range of consequences that could result from supernatural beings' emotional attachments to human heroes. The story of Svava and Helgi Hjorvardsson presents another example of reincarnation cycles, though with different characteristics that reflect varying approaches to managing supernatural mortal relationships. Svava's protection of Helgi involved more direct intervention in battlefield situations, including active combat participation that demonstrated her retained access to Valkyrie's martial capabilities despite her emotional attachment. Her fighting style emphasized aerial combat techniques that took advantage of her retained ability to assume bird form during critical moments of battle. These transformations allowed her to strike at enemy commanders from unexpected angles, while providing reconnaissance information that informed tactical decisions. The coordination between her aerial attacks and Helgi's ground-based forces required extensive tactical planning and precise timing to achieve maximum effectiveness without exposing either partner to unnecessary risks. The supernatural weapons she employed during these combat interventions possessed capabilities that exceeded those available to mortal warriors, including spears that could strike multiple targets simultaneously and swords that could cut through supernatural armor and magical defenses. Her access to these weapons suggested that emotional attachment to mortal heroes did not automatically result in complete separation from divine resources, though the circumstances under which she could employ them remained subject to cosmic restrictions that limited their use to situations involving genuine threats to cosmic balance. The tragic conclusion of her relationship with Helgi through his death in single combat demonstrated the ultimate limitations of supernatural protection in confronting predetermined fate. Despite her advanced warning about the challenge that would prove fatal and her attempts to dissuade him from accepting it, Helgi's heroic nature compelled him to face the supernatural opponent who had been destined to kill him. Svava's inability to prevent this outcome highlighted the fundamental tension between supernatural knowledge and mortal agency that characterized many Valkyrie hero relationships. The punishment mechanisms that governed Valkyrie transgressions reveal sophisticated understanding of supernatural justice within Norse cosmological frameworks. Unlike simple retribution that focused on causing suffering, these punishments typically involved loss of supernatural status and capabilities that forced transgressing Valkyries to experience the full vulnerability and limitations of mortal existence. This approach emphasized rehabilitation and understanding rather than mere punishment, though the emotional costs of such experiences often proved devastating for beings accustomed to supernatural power and immortality. The process of losing divine status involved gradual diminishment of supernatural abilities rather than immediate total loss. allowing transgressing Valkyries to adapt to their changing circumstances while learning to function within mortal limitations. Brunhild's retention of prophetic knowledge and runic wisdom during her punishment demonstrated this graduated approach, though her inability to access divine communication networks and supernatural transportation severely limited her ability to act on the information she possessed. This partial retention of capabilities created ongoing frustration and internal conflict between her retained knowledge and her reduced ability to implement solutions. The psychological impact of these punishments extended beyond simple loss of power to encompass fundamental changes in identity and self-understanding that challenged core aspects of Valkyrie nature. Supernatural beings who had defined themselves through their roles as divine servants and cosmic agents faced the necessity of developing new identities based on mortal relationships and human concerns. This transformation process often proved more difficult than the practical adjustments required by reduced supernatural capabilities, as it demanded fundamental reconceptualization of purpose and meaning within radically different existential frameworks. The social isolation that frequently accompanied these punishments reflected both divine disapproval and the practical difficulties of maintaining relationships with former supernatural colleagues whose continued divine service created barriers to ongoing communication. Fallen Valkyries often found themselves caught between two worlds, no longer fully accepted within divine society, yet possessing knowledge and experiences that separated them from ordinary mortal communities. This isolation intensified the emotional impact of their punishments, while forcing them to develop new social connections based on different principles than those that had governed their supernatural relationships. The redemption possibilities that existed within some of these punishment frameworks suggest that Norse cosmology recognized the potential for supernatural beings to learn from their mistakes and eventually resume appropriate roles within the divine hierarchy. However, such redemption typically required complete acceptance of cosmic authority and demonstrated commitment to subordinating personal desires to divine requirements. The specific conditions for achieving redemption varied according to the nature of original transgressions and the cosmic significance of their consequences, with more serious violations requiring more extensive demonstration of reformed attitudes and behaviours. The manifestation of Valkyries on mortal battlefields represented one of the most dramatic intersections between the supernatural realm and human warfare, creating encounters that fundamentally altered the psychological landscape of combat while serving the cosmic purposes of divine selection. These appearances occurred according to carefully orchestrated patterns that maximized their impact on both individual warriors and broader battle outcomes, requiring extensive preparation and coordination between multiple supernatural agents to achieve the desired effects without violating cosmic restrictions on divine intervention. Contemporary accounts from Germanic and Scandinavian sources describe Valkyrie battlefield appearances as beginning with subtle atmospheric changes that preceded their full manifestation. Warriors reported sudden shifts in wind patterns, the appearance of unusual cloud formations, and changes in light quality that created an otherworldly atmosphere around specific areas of the battlefield. These preliminary phenomena served both practical and psychological functions, alerting supernatural entities to the impending divine presence, while preparing mortal observers for encounters that transcended normal combat experience. The physical manifestation process involved gradual materialization that allowed witnesses to perceive increasing levels of supernatural presence without experiencing the psychological shock that might result from sudden full appearance. Initial sightings typically described shadowy figures moving through morning mist or twilight gloom, their forms becoming more distinct as atmospheric conditions shifted to accommodate their presence. This gradual revelation served to distinguish genuine Valkyrie appearances from hallucinations or misidentified natural phenomena, establishing clear criteria for recognizing authentic supernatural intervention. Witnesses consistently described Valkyries as appearing in full battle array, wearing armour that combined practical protective elements with supernatural enhancements that provided capabilities unavailable to mortal warriors. Their mail shirts incorporated metals that existed nowhere in the earthly realm, forged in divine workshops using techniques that mortal smiths could not replicate. The distinctive gleaming quality of this supernatural armour created visual effects that could be seen across considerable distances, serving as both identification markers and psychological warfare tools that influenced enemy morale through demonstration of divine support for specific forces. The helmets bore distinctive crests and decorative elements that identified individual Valkyries to observers familiar with their particular characteristics and areas of responsibility. Gondal's helmet featured raven feathers arranged in patterns that shifted according to battlefield conditions, while Skogul wore a crest that incorporated wolf fur and bear claws, symbolising her connection to berserker warriors. These identifying elements allowed experienced warriors to recognise which specific Valkyrie had appeared and adjust their expectations accordingly based on that individual's known specialisations and intervention methods. The weapons carried by battlefield Valkyries possess supernatural properties that enhance their effectiveness beyond normal physical limitations, while serving as symbols of divine authority that commanded respect from both friendly and enemy forces. Their spears could strike targets at impossible distances with accuracy that defied natural laws, while their swords could cut through armour and shields that would turn aside mortal weapons. However, these supernatural capabilities were employed selectively according to cosmic restrictions that limited direct intervention in predetermined fate patterns. The selection process for worthy slain involved complex evaluation procedures that assessed multiple criteria simultaneously while maintaining the appearance of natural battle progression. Valkyries observed individual warriors throughout extended combat sequences, analysing their tactical decision-making, treatment of defeated enemies, and responses to supernatural phenomena that tested their spiritual worthiness. This evaluation process required extensive knowledge of heroic ideals and cultural values that varied between different Germanic tribes and historical periods. The psychological assessment component of warrior evaluation involved testing responses to fear, pain, and moral dilemmas that revealed essential character qualities beyond simple martial prowess. Warriors who maintained honour codes under extreme pressure, protected weaker comrades at personal risk, or demonstrated innovative tactical thinking under desperate circumstances received higher evaluation scores than those who relied purely on physical strength or aggressive instincts. These character assessments required sophisticated understanding of human psychology and extensive experience in observing warrior behaviour under combat stress. The actual moment of selection involved supernatural intervention that could influence battle outcomes through subtle modifications of natural events rather than obvious magical manipulation. A warrior marked for selection might find his opponent's weapons striking at a slightly altered angle that proved fatal, or atmospheric conditions might shift to create visibility problems that exposed him to enemy attack at the predetermined moment. These interventions maintain the appearance of natural battle progression, while ensuring that cosmic requirements for specific selections were fulfilled according to divine planning. The transportation of selected warriors from battlefield to Valhalla required immediate supernatural intervention that prevented enemy forces from claiming or desecrating the bodies of the chosen slain. Valkyries employed various techniques for accomplishing this removal, ranging from creating localized weather disturbances that concealed their activities to generating battlefield confusion that distracted potential observers. Yet the speed and efficiency of these removal operations demonstrated the extensive logistical capabilities supporting Valkyrie battlefield activities. The connection between Valkyries and berserker warriors represented one of the most intense forms of supernatural mortal interaction documented in Germanic sources, involving direct spiritual possession that temporarily granted mortal fighters access to supernatural combat capabilities. This possession process required careful preparation through ritual activities that opened the warrior's consciousness to divine influence while maintaining sufficient personal identity to direct the enhanced abilities toward appropriate targets. Archaeological evidence from warrior graves containing bear and wolf imagery suggest that berserker traditions incorporated actual spiritual practices designed to facilitate this supernatural connection. The transformation into berserker fury involved fundamental alteration of normal human consciousness that allowed warriors to access strength, speed, and pain tolerance that exceeded natural limitations. Contemporary accounts describe berserkers displaying impossible physical feats, including lifting and throwing opponents much larger than themselves, continuing to fight effectively despite wounds that would incapacitate normal warriors, and maintaining combat effectiveness for extended periods without rest or nourishment. These capabilities required supernatural enhancement that could only be provided through direct Valkyrie intervention. The psychological state accompanying berserker transformation involved suppression of normal fear responses and social inhibitions that typically constrained warrior behavior during combat. However, this suppression needed to be carefully controlled to prevent berserkers from attacking friendly forces or engaging in destructive behavior that violated heroic codes. Valkyries responsible for managing berserker possession maintained constant monitoring of possessed warriors to ensure that their enhanced capabilities remained directed toward appropriate targets while preventing the psychological disintegration that could result from prolonged supernatural influence. The animal imagery associated with berserker traditions reflected actual shape-shifting capabilities that some Valkyries could grant to their chosen warriors during periods of divine possession. Warriors who achieved deep spiritual connection with their Valkyrie guides could temporarily assume aspects of bear or wolf nature that enhanced their combat effectiveness, while providing psychological advantages through intimidation of enemy forces. These transformations involved more than simple behavioral changes, encompassing actual physical modifications that granted enhanced sensory capabilities and improved coordination for specific combat techniques. The weapons employed by berserker warriors during periods of Valkyrie possession often displayed supernatural properties that exceeded the capabilities of normal arms and armor. Swords that remained sharp despite extensive use, spears that struck with impossible accuracy, and shields that turned aside attacks that should have proven fatal, all demonstrated the material benefits that could accompany spiritual possession by Valkyrie entities. However, these enhanced capabilities typically lasted only for the duration of the possession experience, reverting to normal properties once the supernatural influence withdrew. The historical accounts preserved in various saga sources provide detailed descriptions of specific Valkyrie battlefield appearances that demonstrate the range of intervention methods employed by different supernatural individuals. The Daradal presents 12 named Valkyries working in coordinated fashion to determine the outcome of the Battle of Clontarf in 1014, their activities described through the metaphor of weaving fate on a supernatural loom. This account reveals the collaborative nature of major battlefield interventions that required multiple Valkyries working in carefully orchestrated coordination to achieve desired outcomes. The weaving metaphor employed in the Daradal Jod provides insight into the actual mechanics of Valkyrie battlefield intervention, with individual supernatural agents contributing specific elements to overall battle outcomes while maintaining coordination with their colleagues' efforts. The loom described in the poem uses human entrails as warp threads and severed heads as weights, emphasizing the visceral reality of their decision-making process while demonstrating the material components required for effective fate manipulation. This imagery suggests that Valkyrie battlefield activities involved actual manipulation of physical elements rather than purely spiritual or psychological intervention. The timing of these coordinated interventions required extensive advance planning that took into account multiple variables, including weather conditions, troop movements, and the personal fate patterns of individual warriors whose deaths or survival would influence broader historical developments. The Valkyries working at Clontarf needed to ensure that their selections aligned with cosmic requirements for Irish political development while simultaneously fulfilling Odin's strategic objectives regarding Scandinavian expansion into the British Isles. The geographical scope of documented Valkyrie battlefield appearances extended throughout the Germanic cultural sphere and into territories where Scandinavian warriors conducted military campaigns, suggesting that their intervention capabilities were not limited to traditional homeland regions. Accounts from the Varangian Guard describe supernatural female warriors appearing during Byzantine military operations, while Frankish chronicles record similar phenomena during conflicts involving Germanic mercenary forces. These widespread appearances demonstrate the extensive reach of Valkyrie surveillance and intervention networks. The adaptation of Valkyrie intervention techniques to different cultural contexts and military technologies reveals their sophisticated understanding of diverse warfare traditions and tactical systems. Appearances during cavalry-dominated conflicts in Eastern Europe involved different manifestation patterns than those employed during the shield wall formations, characteristic of Anglo-Saxon warfare. Similarly, interventions during siege operations required specialized techniques for urban combat environments that differed significantly from open-field battle scenarios. The use of magical weapons by battlefield Valkyries encompassed both personal arms enhanced with supernatural properties and specialized implements designed specifically for their unique combat requirements. Their spears could penetrate any armor or magical protection, while their swords could cut through supernatural substances that would turn aside normal blades. However, the employment of these weapons remained subject to cosmic restrictions that limited their use to situations involving genuine threats to divine interests or cosmic balance. The supernatural armor worn by Valkyries during battlefield appearances provided protection against both physical and magical attacks, while serving symbolic functions that identified their divine authority in specific areas of responsibility. The materials used in this armor's construction included metals that existed only in divine workshops, providing protective capabilities that exceeded anything available to mortal warriors. The distinctive appearance of this supernatural equipment served both practical and psychological functions, offering genuine protection while creating visual effects that influenced battlefield morale. The ability to fly using swan cloaks or raven form transformation provided Valkyries with tactical mobility that allowed rapid movement between different areas of large battlefields, while offering aerial reconnaissance capabilities that informed their selection decisions. The transformation process required careful timing to avoid vulnerability during shape-changing, while the aerial perspective provided comprehensive battlefield awareness that enhanced their ability to identify worthy warriors and assess overall combat developments. These flight capabilities also allowed quick extraction of selected warriors and rapid communication with other supernatural agents involved in coordinated interventions. The raven form transformation held particular significance within Germanic warrior culture, due to ravens' traditional association with battlefield scavenging and their role as Odin's messengers. Valkyries who assumed raven form could move through battlefield areas without attracting attention from combatants, allowing close observation of individual warrior performance while maintaining the concealment necessary for effective supernatural surveillance. The psychological impact of raven appearances on battlefield participants reinforced cultural associations between these birds and impending death, creating atmospheric conditions that enhanced the effectiveness of subsequent Valkyrie interventions. Swan form transformation provided different tactical advantages, particularly for reconnaissance missions that required extended flight over large geographical areas, or for situations where the Valkyrie needed to appear as a benevolent rather than ominous supernatural presence. The cultural associations between swans and divine messengers made this form particularly effective, for delivering prophetic warnings or supernatural guidance to worthy heroes who required encouragement rather than intimidation. The coordination between Valkyrie battlefield activities and other supernatural entities involved in Germanic warfare created complex networks of divine intervention that influenced combat outcomes through multiple simultaneous channels. Odin's ravens provided intelligence about enemy movements and strategic developments, while his wolves participated directly in combat alongside selected berserker warriors. The Valkyries needed to coordinate their selection activities with these other supernatural influences to ensure that all divine interventions supported consistent strategic objectives without creating contradictory effects that might undermine overall mission success. The weather manipulation capabilities employed by some Valkyries during battlefield interventions allowed them to create tactical advantages for favoured forces while maintaining the appearance of natural atmospheric phenomena. Sudden fog banks could conceal troop movements or provide cover for tactical repositioning, while wind changes could affect the accuracy of projectile weapons or influence the effectiveness of cavalry charges. These meteorological interventions required extensive knowledge of atmospheric conditions and precise timing to achieve desired tactical effects without creating obviously supernatural phenomena that might violate cosmic restrictions on divine intervention. The psychological warfare techniques employed by battlefield Valkyries involved creating supernatural manifestations that influence combatant morale and fighting effectiveness through carefully orchestrated displays of divine power. These manifestations needed to provide clear indications of supernatural presence while maintaining sufficient ambiguity to allow rational interpretation by observers who preferred natural explanations for unusual battlefield phenomena. The balance between obvious supernatural intervention and plausible natural occurrence required sophisticated understanding of human psychology and extensive experience in managing the psychological aspects of warfare. The supernatural ability of Valkyries to assume animal forms represented one of their most distinctive and strategically valuable capabilities, allowing these divine warriors to transcend the physical limitations that constrained both mortal beings and many other supernatural entities. This shape-shifting power encompassed far more than simple disguise or concealment, involving fundamental alteration of their essential nature that granted access to entirely different sensory experiences, physical capabilities, and modes of interaction with the natural world. The transformation process itself required mastery of complex magical techniques that few supernatural beings possessed, making it a defining characteristic that distinguished Valkyries from other divine servants within the Norse pantheon. The swan transformation held particular significance within Valkyrie tradition due to the symbolic associations between these graceful waterfowl and concepts of divine purity, prophetic wisdom, and the soul's journey between different realms of existence. Archaeological evidence from Scandinavian bog deposits reveals numerous swan-shaped amulets and decorative objects dating from the 3rd through 10th centuries, suggesting that Germanic peoples recognized deep spiritual connections between swans and supernatural female entities long before the full development of Norse Valkyrie mythology. The Nidum boat excavation in Denmark uncovered swan-headed ceremonial objects alongside military equipment, indicating that these birds held special significance within warrior religious practices. The physical mechanics of swan transformation involved the Valkyrie's supernatural essence, temporarily reorganizing itself according to avian rather than humanoid patterns, a process that required complete mastery over the fundamental forces governing corporeal existence. Contemporary accounts describe the transformation as beginning with a shimmering effect around the Valkyrie's form, followed by gradual elongation of the neck and arms while the torso compressed and sprouted feathers. The legs underwent similar modification, developing the webbed feet necessary for aquatic locomotion, while maintaining the strength required for powerful takeoff from water surfaces. The supernatural swan cloaks that facilitated these transformations represented some of the most sophisticated magical artifacts within Norse mythology, crafted from materials that existed nowhere in the mortal realm and imbued with enchantments that allowed temporary fusion between the wearer's consciousness and avian nature. These cloaks appeared as garments of extraordinary beauty, their feathers displaying an otherworldly luminescence that shifted according to atmospheric conditions and the wearer's emotional state. The individual feathers possessed properties that exceeded those of natural swan plumage, providing waterproofing that functioned even in supernatural storms while offering insulation against temperatures that would prove fatal to ordinary creatures. The creation process for swan cloaks involved harvesting feathers from supernatural swans that inhabited the sacred pools surrounding Yggdrasil's roots, creatures whose own nature bridged the gap between physical and spiritual existence. These divine swans possessed intelligence that approached that of minor supernatural beings, making the collection of their feathers a complex diplomatic process that required offerings and negotiations rather than simple hunting. The feathers retained their supernatural properties only when freely given, creating an additional layer of complexity in the cloak creation process that ensured only the most worthy Valkyries could obtain these transformational aids. The weaving of collected feathers into functional cloaks required techniques that combined traditional textile production with advanced magical manipulation, creating garments that could withstand the stresses of repeated transformation while maintaining their supernatural properties across extended periods of use. The thread used to bind the feathers together came from the silk of supernatural spiders that inhabited the spaces between the branches of Yggdrasil, creatures whose webs could support the weight of divine beings while remaining invisible to mortal observation. This silk possessed tensile strength that exceeded any material available in the mortal realm while maintaining the flexibility necessary for comfortable wear during both human and avian forms. The psychological aspects of swan transformation involved temporary integration of avian instincts and sensory capabilities with the Valkyries' supernatural consciousness, creating a hybrid awareness that combined human intelligence with bird-like perception of atmospheric conditions, magnetic fields, and territorial boundaries. This integration process required extensive training to manage effectively, as the sudden influx of unfamiliar sensory input could overwhelm unprepared consciousness, while the instinctual drives associated with avian nature might conflict with supernatural duty requirements. Experienced Valkyries learned to compartmentalize these different aspects of their transformed consciousness, accessing avian capabilities when needed while maintaining their essential supernatural identity. The enhanced visual capabilities gained through swan transformation provided Valkyries with perception that extended far beyond normal human visual range, encompassing ultraviolet and infrared spectrums that revealed details invisible to ordinary sight. This enhanced vision proved particularly valuable for reconnaissance missions that required detailed observation of enemy fortifications, troop movements, or supernatural phenomena that might threaten cosmic balance. The ability to perceive magical auras and divine emanations while in swan form allowed Valkyries to identify supernatural threats or allies that might remain hidden from normal observation, providing crucial intelligence for strategic planning and tactical coordination. The aerial mobility granted by swan transformation offered significant advantages for battlefield reconnaissance and rapid communication between widely separated locations, capabilities that proved essential for coordinating complex military operations across large geographical areas. The supernatural strength and endurance possessed by transformed Valkyries allowed flight distances and speeds that exceeded those of natural swans, enabling reconnaissance missions that could cover entire kingdoms within single flights while maintaining sufficient altitude to avoid detection by enemy forces or hostile supernatural entities. The Raven transformation represented a fundamentally different approach to shape-shifting that emphasized stealth, intelligence gathering, and psychological warfare rather than the grace and mobility associated with swan form. Ravens held special significance within Germanic warrior culture due to their role as battlefield scavengers and their traditional association with Odin's intelligence network, making raven-form Valkyries particularly effective for missions requiring concealment among natural corvid populations while conducting surveillance of enemy activities. The psychological impact of raven appearances on battlefield participants reinforced cultural associations between these birds and impending death, creating atmospheric conditions that enhanced the effectiveness of subsequent Valkyrie interventions. The supernatural raven feathers that enabled this transformation possessed different magical properties than those found in swan cloaks, emphasizing concealment and intelligence enhancement rather than mobility and grace. These feathers appeared as ordinary corvid plumage to casual observation, but possessed supernatural properties that allowed the wearer to access the collective knowledge shared among all ravens within a given geographical area. This hive mind connection provided instant access to information about local events, hidden activities, and potential threats that individual ravens had observed during their scavenging and territorial activities. The creation of raven feather transformation aids required different techniques than those used for swan cloaks, involving negotiations with Hugin and Munin, Odin's personal ravens whose supernatural nature granted them authority over all corvids within the 9 realms. These negotiations typically involved exchanges of information or services rather than simple material offerings, as the divine ravens valued knowledge and strategic intelligence more highly than physical objects or ceremonial honours. The complexity of these arrangements meant that raven transformation capabilities remained limited to Valkyries, whose duties specifically required such abilities, preventing widespread distribution of these specialised tools. The psychological integration required for raven transformation involved adapting to radically different sensory priorities and social structures than those associated with either human or swan consciousness. Ravens possessed complex social hierarchies and communication systems that required understanding of intricate behavioural codes and territorial arrangements, while their scavenging instincts provided access to information sources that other creatures typically avoided. The ability to blend seamlessly into natural raven populations while maintaining supernatural awareness required extensive practice and careful attention to behavioural details that might betray non-corvid nature to observant enemies. The intelligence gathering capabilities enhanced by raven transformation proved particularly valuable for missions requiring infiltration of enemy territories or investigation of supernatural threats that required close observation without detection. Ravens' natural curiosity and scavenging behaviour provided perfect cover for examining battlefield aftermath, investigating ritual sites, or observing the activities of suspicious individuals who might pose threats to cosmic balance. The social nature of corvid communities allowed transformed Valkyries to access information networks that extended across vast geographical areas, providing intelligence about developments in distant regions that might affect strategic planning. The wolf transformation, though less commonly documented than swan or raven forms, represented the most physically demanding and psychologically challenging shape-shifting capability available to certain specialized Valkyries. This transformation required integration with predatory instincts and pack dynamics that differed significantly from the relatively solitary nature of avian forms, while the enhanced physical capabilities gained through wolf form provided combat advantages that proved valuable in specific tactical situations. The supernatural wolves that served as models for this transformation possessed strength, speed, and sensory capabilities that exceeded those of natural pack hunters, making wolf-form Valkyries formidable opponents in direct combat situations. The enchanted wolf pelts that facilitated this transformation incorporated materials from supernatural wolves that inhabited the forests surrounding Valhalla, creatures whose own nature combined natural lupine characteristics with divine enhancements that granted them capabilities unavailable to mortal predators. The collection of these pelts required different approaches than those used for bird feathers, involving complex hunting expeditions that tested the Valkyries' combat skills while demonstrating respect for the supernatural wolves' intelligence and territorial rights. The pelts retained their transformational properties only when obtained through honourable combat that acknowledged the wolves' status as worthy opponents rather than simple prey animals. The psychological adaptation required for wolf transformation involved managing predatory instincts and pack loyalty drives that could conflict with supernatural duty requirements, particularly in situations involving multiple transformed Valkyries working in coordination. The enhanced sensory capabilities gained through wolf form included scent-based information processing that provided detailed knowledge about individual emotional states, recent activities, and health conditions that proved valuable for assessment missions requiring close evaluation of potential targets. However, the intensity of these sensory inputs required careful management to prevent sensory overload that might compromise mission effectiveness. The combat capabilities enhanced by wolf transformation included increased strength, speed, and coordination that allowed transformed Valkyries to engage multiple opponents simultaneously, while maintaining tactical awareness necessary for complex battlefield coordination. The natural pack-hunting instincts gained through transformation provided intuitive understanding of group tactics and coordinated assault techniques that proved particularly effective against enemies who relied on individual prowess rather than team coordination. These enhanced combat capabilities made wolf-form Valkyries valuable assets for missions requiring direct confrontation with supernatural threats that exceeded normal combat parameters. The bear transformation represented the most physically powerful shape-shifting capability documented within Valkyrie tradition, though its use remained limited to specific situations requiring maximum physical strength and intimidation, rather than stealth or mobility. The supernatural bears that provided models for this transformation possessed size and strength that dwarfed natural ursine species, while their enhanced intelligence and magical resistance made them formidable opponents for even experienced supernatural warriors. The transformation process required exceptional physical conditioning and mental discipline to manage the intense psychological changes associated with assuming such a powerful predatory form. The bear pelts used for this transformation incorporated materials from supernatural bears that inhabited the most remote regions of the divine realm, creatures whose territorial nature and formidable combat capabilities made obtaining their pelts extremely challenging even for experienced Valkyries. The collection process typically involved extended expeditions that tested all aspects of Valkyrie training while requiring diplomatic skills to negotiate territorial boundaries and combat prowess to survive encounters with creatures whose strength exceeded that of most supernatural beings. The rarity of successful pelt collection meant that bear transformation remained available only to the most elite Valkyries whose duties specifically required such capabilities. The tactical applications of various animal transformations required careful selection based on mission requirements and environmental conditions, with different forms providing advantages suited to specific operational needs. Swan form proved most effective for long-distance reconnaissance and diplomatic missions, requiring graceful appearance and non-threatening presence, while Raven form excelled in intelligence gathering and psychological warfare applications. Wolf transformation provided advantages for missions requiring pack coordination and enhanced combat capabilities, while bear form offered maximum physical power for situations requiring intimidation or direct confrontation with powerful opponents. The coordination between multiple transformed Valkyries required sophisticated communication systems that functioned across different animal forms while maintaining operational security against potential enemy surveillance. These communication methods incorporated natural animal behaviours and vocalizations that appeared normal to casual observation, while conveying complex tactical information to supernatural participants. The development of these communication protocols required extensive study of natural animal behaviour patterns, combined with magical enhancements that allowed transmission of information beyond normal animal communication capabilities. The symbolic significance of animal transformations within Germanic warrior culture reflected deep spiritual connections between human consciousness and natural predator characteristics that informed concepts of heroic behaviour and supernatural power. The ability to assume animal forms represented mastery over the fundamental forces governing physical existence, while demonstrating harmony between civilized consciousness and natural instincts that characterized ideal warrior development. These symbolic associations enhanced the psychological impact of Valkyrie transformations on mortal observers, while reinforcing cultural values about the relationship between human society and natural world. The magical artifacts associated with transformation capabilities encompassed not only the cloaks and pelts that facilitated shapeshifting, but also various tools and weapons that retained their supernatural properties across different forms. Enchanted jewellery that adjusted its size and configuration according to the wearer's current form ensured that transformed Valkyries maintained access to magical implements necessary for their supernatural duties. Similarly, weapons that could adapt their physical characteristics to remain functional regardless of the wielder's current shape provided combat capabilities that transcended the limitations typically associated with animal forms. The maintenance requirements for transformation artifacts involved regular renewal of their magical properties through rituals that reinforced the enchantments, binding supernatural materials into functional forms. These renewal ceremonies required specific astronomical conditions and ritual components that ensured the artifacts retained their effectiveness across extended periods of use. The complexity of these maintenance procedures meant that transformation capabilities required ongoing investment of time and resources that limited their availability to Valkyries whose duties specifically justified such expenditures. The training programs designed to develop transformation mastery involved progressive exercises that gradually introduced candidates to the psychological and physical challenges associated with each animal form. Initial training focused on brief partial transformations that allowed students to experience altered consciousness and sensory capabilities without the full intensity of complete shapeshifting. Advanced training incorporated extended periods in animal form combined with complex mission scenarios that tested the student's ability to maintain supernatural awareness while effectively utilizing enhanced animal capabilities. The integration of transformation abilities with other Valkyrie capabilities required careful coordination to ensure that shapeshifting enhanced rather than interfered with traditional duties such as battlefield selection and warrior guidance. The timing of transformations needed to align with cosmic requirements and tactical necessities while maintaining the operational security necessary for effective supernatural intervention. This coordination demanded sophisticated understanding of both supernatural duty requirements and natural animal behaviour patterns that allowed seamless transition between different operational modes. The prophetic capabilities of Valkyries extended far beyond their battlefield selection duties, encompassing sophisticated oracular functions that positioned them as crucial intermediaries between divine knowledge and mortal understanding. These supernatural beings possessed access to information networks that transcended normal temporal limitations, allowing them to perceive patterns of cause and effect that stretched across multiple generations while identifying the spiritual significance of seemingly mundane events. Their prophetic abilities operated through complex mechanisms that combined direct, divine revelation with analytical interpretation of cosmic patterns, creating a comprehensive system of supernatural intelligence that informed both immediate tactical decisions and long-term strategic planning. The foundation of Valkyrie prophetic knowledge rested upon their privileged access to the Well of Erd, where the three Norns continuously wove the threads of fate that determine the destinies of gods, heroes, and ordinary mortals alike. This access required specific authorization from Odin himself, granted only to Valkyries whose duties demanded comprehensive understanding of fate patterns extending beyond their immediate battlefield responsibilities. The journey to the well involved traversing dangerous supernatural territories populated by entities hostile to divine agents, making each consultation a significant undertaking that required careful preparation and substantial justification. The information gathered from these consultations encompassed not merely predetermined outcomes, but also the underlying causal relationships that would produce those results through sequences of apparently natural events. Valkyries learned to distinguish between inevitable fate patterns that no mortal action could alter, and conditional prophecies that depended upon specific choices made by key individuals at crucial moments. This distinction proved essential for providing useful guidance to heroes and kings who required actionable intelligence rather than simple predictions of unavoidable doom. Skuld's unique position as both Valkyrie and Norn provided her with unparalleled prophetic capabilities that exceeded those of her supernatural colleagues, allowing her to perceive the intricate connections between individual actions and cosmic consequences with unprecedented clarity. Her prophecies encompassed not only the immediate outcomes of specific battles or political decisions, but also the generational impacts that would shape entire dynasties and kingdoms across extended historical periods. The accuracy of her long-term predictions established her as the most reliable source of prophetic guidance within the Valkyrie hierarchy, though her knowledge of ultimate consequences often made her reluctant to intervene in events whose tragic outcomes served necessary cosmic purposes. Her warnings to various heroic figures demonstrated the sophisticated analytical capabilities required to translate abstract fate patterns into practical guidance that mortal intelligence could comprehend and act upon. When she advised Sigurd about the political machinations surrounding his marriage prospects, her counsel incorporated detailed knowledge of personality dynamics, family histories, and supernatural influences that would shape the decisions of multiple individuals across several kingdoms. The complexity of these interactions required comprehensive understanding of human psychology, combined with supernatural insight into divine politics that affected mortal affairs. The prophetic techniques employed by battlefield-focused Valkyries like Sigrun and Gondal emphasized immediate tactical applications rather than the broad historical patterns that characterize Skuld's more comprehensive oracular functions. These combat-oriented prophecies typically involved advance warning about specific enemy strategies, identification of supernatural threats that conventional reconnaissance could not detect, and guidance about optimal timing for crucial tactical decisions. The accuracy of these battlefield prophecies proved essential for maintaining the credibility necessary for effective supernatural intervention in mortal conflicts. Sigrun's prophetic guidance during the various campaigns of Helgi Hundingsbane demonstrated the practical applications of Valkyrie oracular capabilities in active military situations. Her advance warnings about enemy ambush attempts allowed Helgi's forces to avoid potentially devastating surprises, while positioning themselves to exploit enemy vulnerabilities that conventional intelligence gathering could not identify. These tactical prophecies required real-time analysis of rapidly changing battlefield conditions, combined with supernatural perception of enemy intentions and capabilities that exceeded normal reconnaissance limitations. Her ability to predict the psychological responses of enemy commanders to specific tactical provocations allowed Helgi to manipulate opposing forces into disadvantageous positions through carefully orchestrated deception campaigns. These psychological predictions required sophisticated understanding of individual personality patterns, combined with cultural knowledge about the decision-making processes employed by different Germanic tribes and kingdoms. The accuracy of these behavioural forecasts demonstrated the comprehensive intelligence networks that supported Valkyrie prophetic activities across vast geographical regions. The delivery of prophetic warnings to mortal recipients required careful attention to psychological factors that influenced how individuals processed and acted upon supernatural guidance. Valkyries learned to present their prophecies in forms that matched the recipient's cultural background, intellectual capabilities, and emotional state, ensuring that crucial information could be understood and implemented effectively. Warriors from different tribal traditions required different approaches to prophetic communication, with some cultures emphasizing direct supernatural commands, while others preferred guidance presented as strategic advice based on superior intelligence. The timing of prophetic revelations proved crucial for their effectiveness, as information delivered too early might be forgotten or dismissed before becoming relevant, while warnings provided too late could not influence the events they were intended to affect. Valkyries developed sophisticated understanding of human decision-making processes that allowed them to identify optimal moments for delivering specific types of guidance, taking into account factors such as the recipient's current stress levels, competing priorities, and available resources for implementing recommended actions. Brunhild's prophetic exchanges with Sigurd following her awakening from enchanted sleep demonstrated the most comprehensive form of Valkyrie oracular function, involving systematic transmission of accumulated supernatural wisdom that would guide the hero throughout his subsequent adventures. Her teachings encompassed not only specific warnings about future threats, but also general principles for recognizing and responding to supernatural influences that might affect his decisions. This educational approach required extensive knowledge of heroic psychology, combined with pedagogical skills that could effectively transfer complex supernatural concepts to mortal understanding. The runic wisdom she transmitted included prophetic applications that allowed Sigurd to access limited, oracular capabilities through proper interpretation of supernatural signs and symbols. These techniques involved reading the patterns formed by scattered runestones, interpreting the behaviour of ravens and other creatures associated with divine messengers, and recognizing atmospheric phenomena that indicated supernatural activity in specific geographical areas. The effectiveness of these methods required ongoing practice and refinement, as mortal consciousness lacked the natural supernatural sensitivity that made such interpretations instinctive for divine beings. Her warnings about the political complexities surrounding his future marriage demonstrated the integration of prophetic knowledge with practical political analysis that characterized the most sophisticated forms of Valkyrie guidance. These predictions incorporated detailed understanding of personality conflicts between key individuals, family loyalties that would influence crucial decisions, and supernatural factors that would affect the outcomes of seemingly mundane political negotiations. The accuracy of these complex social prophecies required comprehensive intelligence about multiple royal courts, combined with supernatural insight into the psychological motivations driving individual behaviour patterns. The connection between Valkyrie prophetic abilities and the broader Germanic tradition of wise women and vulvas reflected shared cultural understanding of supernatural knowledge transmission that extended beyond specifically Norse mythological frameworks. Archaeological evidence from ritual sites across Germanic territories reveals material traces of oracular practices that incorporated many elements later associated with Valkyrie prophetic functions, including the use of specialized divination tools, ceremonial spaces designed for supernatural consultation, and burial goods that suggest ongoing communication with deceased supernatural advisors. The vulva tradition documented in various saga sources presents female supernatural practitioners whose prophetic capabilities closely paralleled those attributed to Valkyries, though with greater emphasis on serving mortal communities rather than divine political objectives. These wise women possessed knowledge of cedar magical techniques that allowed them to access supernatural information about future events, hidden knowledge, and the spiritual significance of natural phenomena. The similarities between vulva practices and Valkyrie oracular functions suggest that both traditions drew upon shared cultural concepts about female supernatural authority and wisdom transmission. The Cedar magical system that supported vulva prophetic activities involved techniques for achieving altered states of consciousness that allowed practitioners to perceive information normally hidden from mortal awareness. These techniques included ritual singing, rhythmic movements, and the use of specialized implements that facilitated communication with supernatural entities possessing relevant knowledge. The effectiveness of Cider practices required extensive training in both the technical aspects of consciousness alteration and the interpretive skills necessary for understanding the symbolic language through which supernatural information was typically transmitted. The integration of Cider techniques with Valkyrie supernatural capabilities created enhanced oracular functions that combine the analytical precision of divine intelligence with the intuitive understanding of human concerns that characterized mortal wise women traditions. Valkyries who mastered these hybrid techniques could provide guidance that addressed both cosmic requirements and practical human needs, creating more effective supernatural intervention that achieved divine objectives while respecting mortal agency and cultural values. The ritual frameworks that supported Valkyrie prophetic activities required specific environmental conditions and ceremonial implements that facilitated communication with supernatural information sources. Sacred groves, hilltop locations, and sites associated with natural water sources provided the atmospheric conditions necessary for effective oracular consultation, while specialized tools such as divination staffs, ritual vessels, and carved symbols helped focus supernatural perception on specific questions or areas of concern. The preparation of these ritual spaces required extensive knowledge of supernatural geography, combined with practical skills in creating and maintaining ceremonial environments. The divination staffs employed in Valkyrie prophetic rituals incorporated materials from Yggdrasil itself, providing direct connection to the cosmic forces that governed fate patterns throughout the 9 realms. These staffs required careful preparation through rituals that attuned them to specific types of supernatural information, with different implements specialized for battlefield prophecy, political guidance, or long-term historical prediction. The creation and maintenance of these tools demanded ongoing investment of supernatural resources that limited their availability to Valkyries, whose duties specifically required such capabilities. The interpretation of prophetic visions received during oracular consultations required sophisticated analytical skills that could distinguish between literal predictions and symbolic representations of underlying spiritual principles. Many prophetic revelations came in forms that required extensive cultural knowledge to decode properly, with symbols and imagery that reference mythological narratives, historical precedents, and cultural values that provided context for understanding their practical applications. The development of these interpretive capabilities required years of training under experienced supernatural mentors who could guide novice Valkyries through the complexities of prophetic analysis. The verification procedures used to confirm the accuracy of prophetic revelations involved cross-referencing information obtained through different supernatural sources, while testing predictions against known historical patterns and logical consistency requirements. Valkyries learned to distinguish between genuine prophetic insights and wishful thinking or psychological projection that might contaminate supernatural guidance with personal biases or cultural assumptions. These verification techniques proved essential for maintaining the credibility necessary for effective supernatural intervention in mortal affairs. The communication of prophetic guidance to royal courts and military commanders required diplomatic skills that could present supernatural warnings in forms acceptable to political leaders who might be skeptical of divine intervention claims. Valkyries developed techniques for embedding prophetic warnings within conventional strategic advice, using their superior intelligence networks to provide practical justifications for recommendations based on supernatural knowledge. This approach allowed them to influence crucial decisions without creating political complications that might result from obvious supernatural intervention in mortal governance. The documentation systems used to record and analyze prophetic activities involved maintaining detailed records of predictions, their outcomes, and the factors that influenced their accuracy or failure. These records provided valuable data for improving prophetic techniques, while identifying patterns in supernatural information transmission that could enhance future oracular effectiveness. The analysis of this accumulated data required sophisticated understanding of statistical patterns combined with supernatural insight into the cosmic factors that affected prophetic accuracy under different circumstances. The training programs designed to develop Valkyrie prophetic capabilities involved progressive exercises that gradually introduce students to the psychological and spiritual challenges associated with accessing supernatural information sources. Initial training focused on developing the mental discipline necessary for achieving the altered consciousness states required for effective supernatural consultation, while advanced instruction emphasized the analytical skills needed for interpreting complex prophetic revelations and translating them into actionable guidance for mortal recipients. The coordination between Valkyrie prophetic activities and other supernatural intelligence networks required careful management to ensure that different information sources provided consistent and complementary guidance rather than contradictory recommendations that might confuse mortal recipients. The integration of Valkyrie oracular functions with intelligence gathered by Odin's ravens, supernatural wolves, and other divine agents created comprehensive information systems that could address multiple aspects of complex political and military situations simultaneously. The psychological impact of receiving prophetic warnings from Valkyrie sources often proved as significant as the practical information content, as mortal recipients needed to process the emotional implications of supernatural knowledge while maintaining the psychological stability necessary for effective decision-making. Valkyries learned to provide appropriate emotional support alongside their prophetic guidance, helping heroes and leaders manage the stress associated with knowledge of future challenges while maintaining the confidence necessary for effective leadership during difficult circumstances. The approaching twilight of the gods fundamentally transformed every aspect of Valkyrie operations, intensifying their traditional duties while expanding their responsibilities to encompass unprecedented challenges that would test the very foundations of their supernatural capabilities. As cosmic signs accumulated indicating the approaching end of the current world order, the Valkyries found themselves at the center of the most ambitious military recruitment and preparation campaign in mythological history. The familiar rhythms of battlefield selection and warrior training gave way to urgent mobilization efforts that required them to identify, evaluate, and transport worthy fighters from across all 9 realms with an efficiency and scale that dwarfed their previous activities. The acceleration of Einherjar recruitment reflected Odin's growing awareness that the final battle would demand numbers far exceeding the warrior population that Valhalla had accumulated through centuries of conventional battlefield selection. Intelligence gathered by Hugin and Munin revealed disturbing developments throughout the supernatural realm. The giants of Jotunheim had begun coordinating their traditionally fractious clans into unified military formations, while ancient enemies of the gods emerged from long dormancy to join the growing coalition of forces opposed to Asgard's continued dominance. These revelations forced a complete reassessment of recruitment criteria and operational procedures that had governed Valkyrie activities since the establishment of their divine hierarchy. Gondel found herself appointed as chief coordinator for the expanded recruitment program, her expertise in battlefield magic making her uniquely qualified to manage the complex logistical challenges involved in dramatically increasing the rate of warrior selection and transportation. Her new responsibilities required her to establish recruitment quotas for different geographical regions, while coordinating with local Valkyrie commanders to ensure that selection criteria maintained appropriate standards despite the pressure to increase numbers rapidly. The balancing act between quantity and quality demanded constant adjustment of operational parameters as battlefield conditions changed and new intelligence emerged about enemy capabilities and intentions. The traditional focus on individual warrior merit gave way to more systematic evaluation of entire military units and their potential for integration into Valhalla's existing command structure. Valkyries began assessing not only personal courage and fighting skill, but also leadership capabilities, tactical knowledge, and the ability to function effectively within the multicultural environment that characterized the Einherjar community. Warriors who demonstrated exceptional ability to bridge cultural divides and facilitate cooperation between traditionally hostile groups received priority consideration, as the approaching battle would require unprecedented coordination between fighters from diverse backgrounds and historical periods. Skogul's specialization in psychological warfare proved increasingly valuable as recruitment efforts expanded into territories where Germanic warrior traditions held less influence over local military cultures. Her techniques for identifying warriors whose psychological profiles aligned with Einherjar requirements required adaptation to Celtic, Slavic, and other non-Germanic fighting traditions that emphasized different aspects of martial valor and supernatural connection. The cultural translation of heroic ideals across linguistic and religious boundaries demanded extensive research into local belief systems and military practices that could identify compatible warrior types despite surface differences in cultural expression. The establishment of secondary collection points throughout the mortal realm reflected the logistical impossibility of transporting all selected warriors directly to Valhalla through the traditional Rainbow Bridge route. These intermediate facilities, typically located at sacred sites with existing supernatural connections, required staffing by junior Valkyries who possessed sufficient authority to conduct preliminary warrior processing while lacking the seniority needed for direct access to Asgard's most secure locations. The management of these distributed facilities created new administrative challenges that required development of standardized procedures and communication protocols that could maintain operational security while ensuring consistent application of selection criteria. Herfjortur's workshops experienced unprecedented demand for enhanced weapons and armor that could provide the Einherjar with equipment capable of inflicting meaningful damage against supernatural opponents whose resistance to conventional arms exceeded that of mortal enemies. The forges that had previously produced weapons for individual heroes now operated at industrial scale, their dragon breath flames burning continuously as teams of supernatural craftsmen worked to outfit entire armies with gear that incorporated materials and enchantments previously reserved for the most elite warriors. The technical challenges of mass-producing magical weapons while maintaining their supernatural properties required innovations in both metallurgy and enchantment techniques that pushed the boundaries of divine craftsmanship. The weapons produced during this period incorporated design features specifically intended to counter the anticipated tactics and defences of giant opponents, including enhanced penetration capabilities for breaking through supernatural armour and extended reach modifications that would allow smaller human fighters to engage effectively against enemies of enormous size. Spears received reinforcement enchantments that prevented breakage against giant shields while maintaining the balance and throwing characteristics that experienced warriors expected. Swords incorporated edge-holding magic that would maintain sharpness despite extended combat against opponents whose supernatural nature might normally dull conventional blades within moments of engagement. The armour production program faced even greater challenges, as the Einherjar's diverse physical characteristics required custom, fitting for warriors whose mortal origins spanned centuries of technological development and cultural variation. Mail shirts that had protected 6th century warriors needed modification to accommodate the fighting styles of 10th century Vikings, while maintaining compatibility with weapons and tactics that would prove effective against supernatural opponents. The supernatural materials used in this armour provided protection levels that exceeded anything available during the warriors' mortal lives, yet required careful integration with existing muscle memory and combat reflexes to avoid interfering with established fighting techniques. Randgrid's communication protocols underwent extensive revision to accommodate the linguistic diversity that characterized the expanded Einherjar population. The simplified command language that had previously sufficed for coordinating relatively homogeneous Germanic warrior groups proved inadequate for managing forces that included Celtic druids, Slavic berserkers, and warriors from cultures whose military traditions emphasized entirely different approaches to battlefield coordination. The development of enhanced gesture systems and standardized tactical symbols required extensive testing under simulated combat conditions to ensure that complex battle plans could be communicated effectively, despite language barriers that might prove fatal during actual combat. The training programs designed to prepare the expanded Einherjar force for Ragnarok incorporated scenarios based on intelligence about specific supernatural opponents that the warriors would face during the final battle. Unlike the generalized combat practice that had characterized previous preparation activities, these new exercises simulated encounters with frost giants, fire demons, and monstrous creatures whose abilities and tactics differed significantly from anything the warriors had experienced during their mortal military careers. The psychological preparation required to face opponents whose very appearance violated natural law demanded specialized counseling techniques that could build confidence while maintaining realistic awareness of the challenges involved. Skuld's prophetic insights became increasingly crucial as the approaching end times created temporal distortions that affected the reliability of conventional intelligence gathering methods. Her ability to perceive fate patterns that extended beyond the destruction of the current world order provided strategic guidance about resource allocation and tactical preparation that could not be obtained through normal supernatural surveillance networks. The paradoxical nature of planning for battles that would occur during the breakdown of cosmic order required prophetic capabilities that could function despite the temporal chaos that would characterize Ragnarok's final phases. Her warnings about specific threats that would emerge during different stages of the final battle allowed military planners to develop specialized countermeasures and tactical responses that addressed unique challenges posed by enemies whose supernatural nature placed them beyond the scope of conventional military doctrine. The revelation that certain giant clans possessed magical abilities that could neutralize traditional Einherjar advantages led to development of alternative fighting techniques and specialized equipment that could maintain effectiveness even under conditions where normal supernatural enhancements might fail. The coordination between Valkyrie recruitment activities and the broader divine mobilization effort required unprecedented cooperation with supernatural entities whose traditional roles had little connection to military affairs. The Norns provided crucial information about fate patterns that would influence the timing and location of significant battles, while various minor gods contributed specialized knowledge about supernatural opponents and their vulnerabilities. This collaborative approach demanded diplomatic skills that many Valkyries had never needed to develop, as their traditional autonomy within the military hierarchy gave way to integrated planning processes that required constant consultation and compromise. The establishment of intelligence networks that could monitor giant activities across multiple realms simultaneously required Valkyries to develop new reconnaissance techniques that could penetrate supernatural concealment methods employed by increasingly sophisticated enemy forces. Traditional shape-shifting abilities proved less effective against opponents who possessed their own magical capabilities and had learned to recognize and counter Valkyries' surveillance methods. The development of enhanced stealth techniques and alternative reconnaissance approaches demanded extensive experimentation and training that consumed resources originally allocated to other preparation activities. Sigrun's battlefield command experience became invaluable for developing tactical doctrines that could coordinate the actions of vastly larger forces than had ever been assembled in previous conflicts. The management of armies that numbered in the hundreds of thousands required command structures and communication systems that could maintain effective control despite the chaos and confusion that would characterize battles fought on cosmic scales. Her insights into the psychological factors that influenced warrior performance under extreme stress informed training programs designed to maintain unit cohesion, even when facing opponents whose supernatural nature might normally cause panic and flight. The logistical challenges of maintaining such enormous forces required complete reorganization of Valhalla's support systems, with expanded facilities for housing, feeding, and equipping warriors whose numbers strained even the supernatural hall's vast capacity. The mead production from Heidrun's udders needed supplementation from additional supernatural sources, while the daily resurrection of warriors killed in training exercises required enhanced magical support to prevent the system from becoming overwhelmed by the volume of casualties generated by more intensive preparation activities. The psychological preparation of Valkyries themselves for their roles during Ragnarok involved confronting the reality that many would not survive the final battle, despite their supernatural nature and extensive combat experience. The prophetic knowledge that revealed the ultimate fate of various divine beings created emotional challenges that required new support systems and counselling approaches within the Valkyrie community. The maintenance of morale and effectiveness despite knowledge of approaching doom demanded leadership techniques that could inspire continued dedication to duty while acknowledging the gravity of their situation. The adaptation of traditional Valkyrie functions to serve the requirements of cosmic warfare involved fundamental changes in their relationship with fate and divine authority. The approaching end of the current world order meant that many of the cosmic restrictions that had previously limited their intervention in mortal affairs no longer applied, granting them greater freedom of action while simultaneously increasing their responsibilities for ensuring that crucial events unfolded according to divine requirements. This expanded authority required careful management to prevent conflicts between individual initiative and coordinated strategic planning. The identification of warriors whose destinies extended beyond Ragnarok into the renewed world that would follow the cosmic destruction became a specialized function that required prophetic capabilities exceeding those possessed by most Valkyries. These individuals, whose survival of the final battle was predetermined by fate patterns established at the creation of the current world order, required different preparation and protection than warriors whose roles would conclude with their participation in the cosmic conflict. The management of these dual populations within the same training and housing facilities created additional administrative complexities that strained existing organizational systems. The development of contingency plans for various scenarios that might unfold during the final battle reflected the unprecedented nature of cosmic warfare, where traditional military doctrine provided limited guidance for conflicts that would determine the fundamental structure of reality itself. Valkyries found themselves planning for possibilities that included the temporary defeat of divine forces, the successful defense of specific strategic locations against overwhelming opposition, and the coordination of evacuation procedures that might preserve essential personnel and resources for the post-Ragnarok reconstruction period. The preservation of Valkyrie traditions within the great literary works of medieval Scandinavia reveals a complex evolution from oral storytelling to systematic mythological documentation, with each source contributing unique perspectives on these supernatural warriors while reflecting the cultural and religious transformations that shaped Norse society during the transition from paganism to Christianity. The Poetic Edda stands as the most comprehensive collection of early Valkyrie material, preserving ancient verses that capture the raw power and mystery of these divine beings before later systematization modified their essential characteristics to fit more organized theological frameworks. The Völuspá presents Valkyries within the broader context of cosmic prophecy, where their battlefield activities serve as harbingers of the approaching end times, rather than routine administrative functions within an established divine hierarchy. The Volva's prophetic vision describes these supernatural warriors as active participants in the escalating conflicts that will culminate in Ragnarok, their selection of fallen heroes serving the urgent purpose of assembling the armies needed for the final battle. This portrayal emphasizes their roles as agents of cosmic necessity rather than servants of divine preference, suggesting that their battlefield choices follow predetermined patterns established by fate itself rather than Odin's tactical considerations. The specific names mentioned in the Völuspá, Skuld, Skogul, Gunnar, Hilda, Gondel, and Giraskogul appear without the detailed characterization found in later sources, presented instead as forces of nature whose very existence shapes the course of historical events. The poem's treatment of these figures as elemental aspects of warfare and death reflects an understanding of Valkyries that predates their integration into the complex administrative systems described in prose sources. Archaeological evidence from 6th through 8th century Scandinavian sites supports this interpretation, with grave goods and ritual deposits suggesting that early Germanic peoples conceived of battlefield spirits as autonomous supernatural forces rather than subordinate divine servants. The Grimnismal provides the most detailed architectural description of Valhalla found in Eddic literature, establishing the physical framework within which Valkyrie hall service activities would unfold. The poem's enumeration of the hall's 540 doors, each capable of accommodating 800 warriors simultaneously, creates a sense of vast scale that emphasizes the magnitude of the recruitment and preparation activities that the Valkyries would need to coordinate. The naming of specific Valkyries responsible for serving mead to the Einherjar, Hrist, Mist, Skegdjold, Skogul, Hilda, Thruda, Hlokk, Hafjötur, Gol, Gyrahod, Randgrid, Radgrid, and Regenleif establishes individual identities that would be developed further in later narrative sources. The functional specialization implied by these names reveals sophisticated understanding of the administrative complexity required for managing Valhalla's operations. Herfjötur's name, meaning host fetter, suggests responsibility for binding or organizing the warrior hosts, while Randgrid, shield truce, implies involvement in maintaining peace within the hall, despite the presence of warriors from traditionally hostile groups. This systematic approach to Valkyrie roles contrasts sharply with the more elemental presentation found in the Völuspá, indicating that the Grimnismal preserves traditions from a period when Valkyrie mythology had already undergone significant organizational development. The Helgilays present the most psychologically complex portrayals of individual Valkyries found in Eddic literature, exploring the tensions between supernatural duty and personal attachment through detailed narrative development that reveals both the capabilities and limitations of these divine beings. The Helga Kvidar Hundingsbana of Försen II chronicles Sigrun's relationship with Helgi Hundingsbane across multiple incarnations, demonstrating how Valkyrie mortal relationships could transcend individual lifetimes while adapting to changing historical circumstances and cultural contexts. Sigrun's active participation in Helgi's military campaigns illustrates the practical applications of Valkyrie's supernatural abilities in specific historical situations, providing detailed examples of how these beings could influence battle outcomes through intelligence gathering, tactical advice, and limited direct intervention. Her reconnaissance flights over enemy territories demonstrate the strategic value of shape-shifting abilities, while her prophetic warnings about specific threats reveal the immediate practical applications of supernatural knowledge in military planning. The accuracy of her tactical predictions establishes credibility for the broader prophetic traditions associated with Valkyrie figures throughout Norse literature. The reincarnation cycle that governs the Helgi-Sigrun relationship introduces temporal complexities that challenge conventional understanding of supernatural mortal relationships. The poem's treatment of recurring souls and persistent attachments across multiple lifetimes suggests that certain spiritual connections possessed cosmic significance that transcended individual incarnations. This cyclical approach to supernatural romance would influence later medieval literature throughout Europe, providing a model for exploring themes of eternal love and spiritual destiny that resonated with both pagan and Christian audiences. The Volundic Veda presents Valkyries in their swan maiden aspect, emphasizing their shape-shifting capabilities and the vulnerability that accompanied their transformation abilities. The capture of 3 swan maidens by mortal brothers establishes the theme of supernatural beings constrained by the loss of their transformational artifacts, a motif that would appear throughout Germanic folklore and medieval literature. The poem's treatment of these figures as simultaneously powerful supernatural warriors and vulnerable captives reveals the complex relationship between divine authority and mortal agency that characterizes much of Norse mythological thinking. The 9-year period during which the captured Valkyries remain with their mortal captors suggests that supernatural beings could adapt to extended periods of mortal existence while retaining their essential divine nature. Their eventual recovery of their swan cloaks and return to supernatural duties demonstrates that temporary separation from divine service did not necessarily result in permanent loss of supernatural status, though the emotional consequences of such experiences clearly influenced their subsequent behaviour and decision-making processes. Snorri Sturluson's prose, Edda represents the most systematic attempt to organise and rationalise the diverse Valkyrie traditions preserved in earlier sources, creating a coherent mythological framework that could serve both educational and entertainment purposes for 13th century Icelandic audiences. The Gylfaginning presents Valkyries as integral components of Odin's military organisation, emphasising their administrative functions and hierarchical relationships, rather than the more elemental characteristics emphasised in Eddic poetry. This systematization reflects Snorri's broader project of preserving pagan mythological knowledge within frameworks that Christian audiences could understand and appreciate without compromising their religious beliefs. Snorri's enumeration of Valkyrie names and functions creates a comprehensive catalogue that synthesizes information from multiple earlier sources while adding organisational details that clarify their roles within the divine hierarchy. His distinction between Valkyries who serve in Valhalla and those who participate in battlefield activities establishes functional categories that help explain the apparent contradictions between different traditional accounts. The systematic approach to their duties and capabilities provides a foundation for understanding how these supernatural beings could fulfill multiple roles while maintaining consistent identities across different narrative contexts. The integration of Valkyrie mythology with broader Norse cosmological concepts in the prose, Edda demonstrates Snorri's sophisticated understanding of the theological implications of pagan supernatural beliefs. His treatment of Valkyries as agents of divine will operating within predetermined fate patterns resolves potential conflicts between concepts of free will and cosmic determinism that might otherwise undermine the coherence of his mythological system. This theological sophistication suggests that 13th century Icelandic intellectuals possessed nuanced understanding of the philosophical complexities inherent in their ancestral religious traditions. The Volsunga saga presents the most psychologically complex individual Valkyrie in medieval literature through its portrayal of Brunhild, whose character development encompasses the full range of supernatural capabilities and emotional vulnerabilities that defined these beings within Norse tradition. The saga's treatment of her punishment for disobedience, her awakening by Sigurd, and her subsequent manipulation of events leading to his death creates a narrative arc that explores fundamental questions about the relationship between divine justice and personal agency. The detailed psychological analysis of her motivations and decision-making processes reveals sophisticated understanding of the internal conflicts that could affect supernatural beings who possess both divine authority and emotional depth. The saga's integration of Valkyrie mythology with heroic legend demonstrates how these supernatural figures could serve both mythological and narrative functions within the same work, providing cosmic significance for heroic adventures while maintaining their essential characteristics as divine warriors and wisdom bearers. Brunhild's transmission of runic knowledge and prophetic warnings to Sigurd illustrates the educational role that Valkyries could fulfill in relationships with worthy heroes, while her ultimate sacrifice demonstrates the tragic consequences that could result from conflicts between personal attachment and cosmic duty. The detailed description of Brunhild's supernatural abilities, her prophetic knowledge, runic wisdom, and warrior skills provides comprehensive documentation of Valkyrie capabilities that supplements the more fragmentary information found in Eddic sources. The saga's treatment of these abilities as integral aspects of her character rather than arbitrary magical powers demonstrates sophisticated understanding of how supernatural capabilities related to personality and cosmic function within Norse mythological frameworks. Njal's saga incorporates Valkyrie material through the famous Daradal-Jod episode, which presents 12 named Valkyries weaving the fate of warriors at the Battle of Clontarf in 1014. This historical application of mythological material demonstrates how 13th century Icelandic authors could integrate traditional supernatural beliefs with documented historical events, creating narrative frameworks that provided cosmic significance for actual battles, while maintaining credibility for contemporary audiences familiar with the historical facts. The weaving metaphor employed in the Daradal-Jod reveals sophisticated understanding of how fate-working operated within Norse cosmological concepts, with individual Valkyries contributing specific elements to overall battle outcomes while maintaining coordination with their supernatural colleagues. The poem's description of the loom constructed from human entrails and weighted with severed heads emphasizes the visceral reality of their decision-making processes, while demonstrating the material components required for effective supernatural intervention in mortal conflicts. The specific tactical details provided in the poem, the positioning of different warrior groups, the timing of crucial attacks, and the coordination between various allied forces suggest that the author possessed detailed knowledge of the actual battle combined with sophisticated understanding of how supernatural influences might affect military outcomes. This integration of historical fact with mythological interpretation creates a unique literary work that serves both as historical chronicle and mythological exposition. Other Icelandic sagas incorporate Valkyrie material with varying degrees of emphasis and detail, reflecting the diverse ways that these supernatural figures could be integrated into different narrative contexts and thematic frameworks. The Egil saga includes references to battle spirits that influence combat outcomes, while the Grettis saga mentioned supernatural female warriors who appear during crucial confrontations. These scattered references demonstrate the persistence of Valkyrie traditions within Icelandic literary culture, even when they do not serve central narrative functions. The gradual transformation of Valkyrie portrayals in later medieval literature reflects the increasing influence of Christian theological concepts on traditional Norse mythological material. Earlier sources present these supernatural beings as autonomous agents whose decisions shaped cosmic events according to their own understanding of divine will and cosmic necessity. Later medieval works increasingly subordinate them to explicit divine authority, while emphasizing moral and ethical considerations that align with Christian values rather than purely heroic ideals. The Christianization process affected different aspects of Valkyrie tradition, with varying intensity and success. Their roles as psychopomps conducting worthy souls to supernatural afterlife destinations proved relatively compatible with Christian concepts of divine judgment and heavenly reward, allowing these functions to persist in modified forms throughout the medieval period. However, their autonomous decision-making authority and their romantic relationships with mortal heroes created theological difficulties that required significant modification or complete elimination in works intended for Christian audiences. The suppression of certain Valkyrie characteristics in later medieval literature resulted in the loss of important mythological information that can only be recovered through careful analysis of earlier sources and comparative study of related Germanic traditions. The elimination of their prophetic and magical capabilities from many later works removed crucial elements that had defined their essential nature within pagan religious frameworks, creating incomplete portrayals that failed to capture the full complexity of these supernatural beings. The scholarly evolution in understanding Valkyrie traditions reflects changing approaches to medieval literature and Norse mythology that have developed over the past 2 centuries of academic research. Early scholars focused primarily on collecting and cataloguing mythological material without extensive analysis of cultural contexts or religious significance. Later research emphasized comparative mythology and linguistic analysis that revealed connections between Norse traditions and broader Germanic religious concepts, while contemporary scholarship increasingly focuses on the social and political functions that these mythological figures served within medieval Scandinavian society. The recognition that Valkyrie traditions preserved important information about pre-Christian Germanic religious practices has enhanced understanding of the cultural transitions that occurred during the medieval period, revealing how pagan mythological concepts could be modified and preserved within Christian literary frameworks. This research has demonstrated the sophisticated theological thinking that characterized medieval Icelandic intellectual culture, while highlighting the complex negotiations between traditional and imported religious concepts that shaped the development of medieval Scandinavian literature. The modern scholarly consensus recognizes Valkyries as complex mythological figures whose traditions preserve important information about Germanic warrior culture, religious practices, and cosmological concepts that would otherwise be lost to historical record. The evolution from autonomous battlefield spirits to subordinate divine servants reflects broader changes in Scandinavian society during the medieval period, while their persistent appeal in literature and popular culture demonstrates the enduring power of mythological concepts that address fundamental human concerns about death, heroism, and spiritual destiny. The comprehensive examination of Valkyrie traditions across the full range of Norse literary sources reveals supernatural beings whose complexity and significance extended far beyond their popular image as mere battlefield selectors or divine servants. These figures embodied sophisticated theological concepts about the relationship between fate and free will, the nature of heroic virtue, and the cosmic significance of individual moral choices. Their stories preserve crucial information about pre-Christian Germanic religious thought, while demonstrating the literary skill and intellectual sophistication of medieval Scandinavian authors who adapted ancient traditions to serve contemporary cultural and educational purposes. The Valkyries thus stand as testament to the enduring power of mythological thinking to address fundamental questions about human existence and spiritual destiny that transcend specific historical periods or religious frameworks, ensuring their continued relevance for understanding both medieval literature and the broader human experience of confronting mortality through heroic action and spiritual transformation